Chapter 10-12. Wu-Ming came to the Uruk wall where the seal of divinity, Dinger, was placed and looked towards the southwest. At this moment, the dark clouds were approaching the Uruk. Although the sea of black mud could not be seen with the naked eye, Wu-Ming could still feel that the sea level was rising. The sea of black mud that was blocked by Nabistan's tooth was getting more and more turbulent. As the last few humans in the north had retreated into the Uruk, countless Ramu that could not find any living humans were wandering around the vast land outside the Uruk. They were going crazy because they could not enter the Uruk. However, the number of the mermaid Kururu, one of the 11 mythical beasts, was decreasing. It seemed like the other Ramu had killed them and turned them into Ramu. However, no matter how many Ramu there were, they could not enter the wizardry barrier that was set up by Wu-Ming's relic above the Uruk. Bless the world with this body, my god. Treat. Level. A++ type. Wizardry relic distance. Maximum catch. Henryong, who was defined as a god, was separated from the humans and returned to heaven. This relic was created by the humans' belief in Henryong. It was the last bit of power that protected the humans. It represented the separation of humans and God, which was the gradual disappearance of mysteries. After that, the era of gods would completely disappear, and the humans would usher in their own era. The specific effect was that mysteries that were malicious to the humans would be annihilated while mysteries that were kind to the humans would be weakened. This relic represented the irreversible force of the separation of humans and gods, and the disappearance of the era of gods. Although it had a certain effect on Wu-Ming and the rest, it only weakened them and did not affect them much. To the mythical beasts, not only were they separated, but they were also hostile to the humans. Therefore, when the light film shrouded the Uruk, a small number of Ramu and Kururu in the Uruk light film were physically separated. However, if it was to deal with Tiamat, this relic might not be enough to separate her. Therefore, as long as Tiamat personally came, the human race would definitely perish. However, no matter how hard Wu-Ming looked, he could not see a trace of Tiamat's figure. Hiding underground was even more ridiculous. Zhuge Kongming had already moved the Stone Warrior 8 formations to the southeast. If Tiamat was moving underground, they would be able to discover it. Since there was no sign of Tiamat, it was obvious that Tiamat had not moved at all. Do you think that Ramu alone can destroy mankind? Or does Tiamat have other secrets? Wu-Ming muttered to himself. Wu-Ming believed that the latter was more reliable. At the very least, these Ramu were Tiamat's children. If they could not defeat them after a long time, they would definitely attack Tiamat. His Excellency Henryong. A lively childlike voice entered Wu-Ming's ears. Wu-Ming turned his head and found that it was Nuwakamaru. There were 2 people behind him. They were the remaining 2 lancers who were guarding the north wall. The soldiers at the north wall had retreated, so they naturally retreated as well. Everyone, how have you been? Wu-Ming greeted them. His Excellency Henryong is thinking about Tiamat's matter? Musasobo Benkei, who followed Nuwakamaru to Wu-Ming's side, looked into the distance and said in a muffled voice, Tiamat hasn't moved for so long. There must be something going on. Leonidas I answered Musasobo Benkei. We can't continue to waste time with Tiamat. If she doesn't come to us, we have to go to her. Wu-Ming's face became firm. They might have to take the initiative to attack. When Nuwakamaru and the other 2 heard this, their faces changed like Wu-Ming's, but they also agreed with Wu-Ming's words. They had no way to waste time with Tiamat. Several servants belonging to the Uruk were cut off from Gilgamesh's magic supply. They had to rely on food to survive. In addition, all the existing humans in this era were gathered in the Uruk. The food could not last for more than a few days. When the time came, there was no need for Ramu and Tiamat. The humans would starve to death. Your Excellency, do you mean that Tiamat is deliberately wasting time with us? However, Wu-Ming shook his head and denied Musasobo Benkei's words. She doesn't need to do this. I suspect that Tiamat is restricted by something and can't move for a while. It was said that Tiamat had a huge dragon body. She only used her body to carry out physical attacks, and humans would be easily defeated. Therefore, Wu-Ming believed that Tiamat was temporarily unable to move for some reason. Wu-Ming decided to go back and ask Enkidu. She should know about Tiamat. Looking at the gradually darkening sky, Wu Ming shook his head. Let's wait until tomorrow to let everyone have a good rest tonight. Let's have a good rest tonight. If there's anything, we can discuss it tomorrow. The three of them nodded as they understood what Wu Ming meant. At this moment, Tiamat could not move, and the demonic beasts outside Uruk could not enter. Now was a precious and rare time to rest. How could they not make good use of it? It was a quiet night. Whether it was a king or a civilian, whether it was a servant or a master, everyone had a good rest. After all, with Wu Ming's noble phantasm, they did not have to worry about the invasion of demonic beasts. In the Chaldean embassy, Wu Ming woke up early in the morning and began to prepare breakfast. That's right, Wu Ming stayed in the Chaldean embassy last night. As for the room, Wu Ming slept on the roof. The Mesopotamia region was not said to be like spring all year round, but the temperature difference between summer and winter was not very big. Even if he slept outdoors, it would be fine, not to mention that Wu Ming was a servant. I slept so well last night. Gadatsi yawned as she walked down the stairs and came to the first floor. Yes, senpai. When the doctor contacted me this morning, he said that senpai's body had an unprecedented rest in all aspects. Matthew echoed behind Gadatsi. Fufu, who was like a squirrel, also called twice. Fufu is also very energetic. Matthew picked up Fufu. Gadatsi did not answer Matthew's previous question because she saw Wu Ming. Assassin, you can cook? Gadatsi looked at Wu Ming, who was wearing a Mesopotamia apron, carrying a stack of food that she did not know the name of, to the table. There were several plates on the table, all of which were filled with food that Gadatsi had never seen before. It smells so good. Matthew also ignored the previous topic because of Wu Ming's food. Whoa, I haven't heard of this food for many years. It reminds me of the story of the king who often went to the kitchen to steal food. Merlin also walked down the stairs in a strange manner. Wu Ming glared at Merlin. Merlin smiled awkwardly and did not speak again. After all, if it wasn't for Wu Ming being merciful last night, Merlin would have been the one sleeping on the roof. Is there butter cake? And a slightly shy voice followed Merlin's. There is no butter cake, but I made some modern snacks. Anna can try them later. Mesopotamia's butter cake was somewhat different from modern butter cake, so Wu Ming did not try to make it, but he did bake some modern snacks. Go wash up first. There will be guests later. Guests? Gadatsi and Matthew looked at each other, and both saw doubt in each other's eyes. But it did not matter. They would know later. Chapter 10:13. Everyone came to the table after washing up and sat down. They found that there were more and more dishes on the table, and it didn't seem like the five of them could finish it all. Villo-senpai? How many guests are there? Matthew wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and smiled awkwardly. Don't worry, they're here. Wu Ming pointed to the door, and three figures appeared at the door. Miss Nuwakamaru. Mr. Chin. Mr. Leonidas. Matthew was surprised. Mr. Fujimaru, Mr. Matthew, long time no see. Nuwakamaru greeted them calmly, but she didn't have much contact with Chaldea, so she didn't say much. Musasobo Benkei and Leonidas I were the same. The three of them were either at the northern wall, or at the temporary stronghold built in the northwest, while Fujimaru and the others were either in the Uruk or the dense forest in the south. Although they were familiar with each other, they were only familiar with each other. In terms of familiarity, Wu Ming was much more familiar to Nuwakamaru than Gadatsi and the others. Nuwakamaru and the others sat down calmly, but the inexplicably lengthened table and the dishes on the table still couldn't be finished by three more people. At this time, a lively voice came from the door. Yo, big sister, I'm here. Quizzard dragged the weak leopard man into the Chaldean embassy. She found a seat and sat down, and instantly threw the leopard man to the seat next to her. Miss Quizzard is here too. Matthew was surprised again. Gadatsi was quite interested in the leopard man's current state, but she could probably guess that he was beaten up by Quizzard because he provoked Quizzard. I was invited by Hyunryong for breakfast. Quizzard smiled sweetly at Gadatsi. So Nuwakamaru and the others are the same? Gadatsi guessed. Yes, Mr. Fujimaru, we're not the only ones invited. As if agreeing with Nuwakamaru's words, another person, or rather a golden king, came in from the entrance of the Chaldean embassy. Ha 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 ha, this king's arrival, the entire Chaldean embassy seems to be a lot brighter. The newcomer was naturally Gilgamesh. King Gilgamesh. This time, Gadotsi and Matthew were shocked. They really didn't expect Gilgamesh to be among the guests. What's the point of being so arrogant? Even if it's brighter, it's all because of this goddess. Ishtar, who came in later, crossed her arms and looked at Gilgamesh with disdain. Oh, the goddess of greed even wants to take this king's glory for herself. Gilgamesh mocked mercilessly. You shiny golden guy? I hope you die of overwork. However, before Gilgamesh and Ishtar could quarrel, Siduri's figure came in. Okay, king and goddess. Today you were invited by Hyenryong Sama to enjoy breakfast. You can't be so rude. Her words, which were neither flattering nor harsh, made Gilgamesh and Ishtar both shut their mouths. Siduri, the two of them really can't do anything to you. Enkidu, who had a smile on his face, walked in holding Funbaba's hand. You're exaggerating. Siduri bowed. In this regard, Gadotsi and Matthew were almost stunned. Good heavens, all the powerful forces of this era had gathered together. However, only Wuming knew that Ereshkigal was still missing, but that couldn't be helped. After all, she couldn't leave the underworld. Okay, everyone, hurry up and take a seat. This is my cooking that I haven't made for a long time. Hurry up and try it. Hearing this, Gilgamesh and the others also sat down. Seeing so many powerful gods and kings sitting next to them, Gadotsi and Matthew were a little uncomfortable. The two were still thinking about whether to change seats. However, Gilgamesh also said that this banquet was hosted by Wuming after all, and even he couldn't steal the limelight. What he meant was, no matter who was in charge, they could sit anywhere. Everyone began to enjoy the food. At this moment, it was as if they really obeyed Gilgamesh's order. Everyone, including Gadotsi, was no longer restrained and completely let go of their limbs. Leonidas I and Musasobo Benkei competed in drinking. Quizzard, as the big sister, played with Gadotsi. Matthew and Anna discussed which snacks Wuming made were delicious. Gilgamesh and Ishtar were once again at each other's throats, and Siduri was the lubricant between them. Enkidu looked at this scene and smiled helplessly, then looked at Wuming, who was chatting with Nuwakamaru. As for the leopard man, he was bragging with Funbaba and Fufu, but he was ignored by the two beasts. Now it didn't seem like they were facing the coming doomsday at all, but more like an ordinary party. Roman, who was in Chaldea and watching this scene through Gadotsi's bracelet, sighed. I really don't know whether to be happy or sad. By the way, Roman showed a tangled expression. Roman was happy to see everyone in a good mood, but their good mood made Roman a little worried. After all, there was still the threat of Tiamat. However, Leonardo da Vinci didn't care so much, instead he smiled. This is a bit like a different version of The Last Supper. The Last Supper that Leonardo da Vinci made before his death seemed to be comfortable, but it was actually a crisis. Now the banquet in the Chaldean embassy was just like that. You're so careless. Roman rolled his eyes at Leonardo da Vinci. This was probably the benefit of being a servant. There was no need to think too much. But no matter how you look at it, it's breakfast. Looking at the harmonious table in the monitor, Roman gave up complaining about Leonardo da Vinci, and he gradually immersed himself in this warm scene. After all, it's good to do this occasionally, isn't it? I'm hungry. I'm going to get a cup of coffee. Roman got up and left the monitor. However, Leonardo da Vinci sat in Roman's position and waved at Roman like a rich man. By the way, help me get a cup. The cup is next to the coffee machine. Thank you. Yes, understood. The meal was very fast, and the delicious food that everyone enjoyed in Chaldean embassy was quickly wiped out. After that, everyone went to the highest floor of the tower, Gilgamesh's office between the throne. Gilgamesh, who was sitting on the high throne, glanced at the people standing neatly in front of him, and immediately spoke. So Tiamat's counterattack strategy meeting, let's start now. Gilgamesh's imposing words entered everyone's ears, and most people's faces became extremely serious. The reason why it was most people was because there were a small number of people who didn't become serious, but showed a surprised expression. Hey! Wait a minute, counterattack. Are we going to counterattack Tiamat? Chapter 10:14. Matthew and Gadotsi were the only two people who were surprised. That's right. I think you have also noticed that we don't have much food left, and all the humans in Mesopotamia have gathered in the Uruk. Although there is no problem for the time being, in a few days, the shortage of food will appear, and we will be in trouble. Gadotsi and Matthew heard Wu Ming's words and instantly understood. After all, they were modern people, and they could understand what would happen in the Uruk through the usual compulsory education. At that time, humans would starve to death because they were trapped in the Uruk without food, and in serious cases, there might be riots. After all, appetite was one of the most basic desires of humans, and there was no way to suppress it. Once it broke out, it would be more terrible than a natural disaster. Outside the Uruk were Ramu, and humans could not go out to look for food. Only servants could do it, but there was no way to get food for so many people with only a few servants. Therefore, the only way was to take the initiative to attack, and the main attacker was Wu Ming. Wu Ming talked to Gilgamesh last night about this matter, and Gilgamesh also agreed. In fact, whether we take the initiative to attack or wait for Tiamat to attack, our chances of winning are very low. Leonardo da Vinci's voice came from Gadotsi's bracelet. After all, the opponent was the god of creation. So whether we take the initiative to attack or passively defend, the probability of winning is almost the same. Although Roman's words were discouraged, it also meant that taking the initiative to attack was better than passively defending. Why didn't Tiamat take the initiative to attack? Gadotsi was quite puzzled. That's because Mother is bound. Enkidu stood up. Bound. Matthew could not help but be stunned. And that's the binding that Tiamat put on herself. Wu Ming interrupted. What? Whether it was Gadotsi, Matthew, or the others, they were more or less surprised by this. Why? Gadotsi asked. She didn't understand why she would impose restrictions on herself. Because Mother has always loved humans and their children. That's why she added restrictions to herself. Enkidu, who had fused with Kingu, was well aware of this. Wu Ming had also asked Enkidu about this last night. At this moment, Gilgamesh, who was sitting on the throne, suddenly interrupted. Do you know that humans are evil? Humans are evil. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other in confusion. The two goddesses, Quizzard and Ishtar, had a serious look in their eyes. It was obvious that the two of them knew that humans were evil. Humans are evil. Roman from Chaldea repeated silently. Humans are evil beasts of original sin. There are a total of 7 original sin beasts, and they are disasters that can destroy humans. Merlin also spoke. But in the end it was still Roman who explained. Humans are evil refers to various disasters that threaten human history and destroy humans. They are born from human civilization and grow stronger with the development of human civilization. They will destroy the civilization from the inside of human society. They are like cancer cells. Furthermore, as long as human beings exist, this evil will not disappear. It will grow stronger with the development of human civilization. To put it simply, it was an existence that accompanied humans. Because of the disasters caused by the bestial nature of humans, humans are also called beasts. Tiamat is the second beast that holds the principle of return, Beast 2. Merlin finished Roman's sentence, then looked at Wu Ming and signaled for Wu Ming to continue. With a helpless smile, Wu Ming spoke. The essence of human evil is human love. It is precisely because of this that Tiamat, who loves her lover and her children, will become one of the human evils. Gadotsi and Matthew suddenly understood. After that, Wu Ming inexplicably thought of the human final trial he encountered in the box garden world. Moreover, human evil is not the evil that destroys humans, but the evil that destroys humans. That is the existence that humans need to overcome. Only by overcoming it can humans continue to develop. Therefore, in a sense, it is not wrong to call it the human final trial. After all, human evil is a disaster for humans, and it is not wrong to call it the human final trial. The existence that needs to be overcome. Human final trial. Matthew and Gadotsi, who were present as humans, muttered silently. Seeing Gadotsi and Matthew in deep thought, Wu Ming walked in front of the two, stretched out his hand, and gave them a knock on the head. Ah, it hurts. Senior Villo. Gudatsi covered her head with tears and looked at Wuming. Matthew performed better than Gudatsi. He did not cry out in pain, but she also covered her head. Although it is said that the human final trial needs humans to overcome it, it is just a formality. It is not necessary for humans to overcome it. For the self-destruction mechanism of humans such as the 7 human evils, the suppression force has already prepared a corresponding safety device, which is the 7 crown servants. The shaped moon world is different from the box garden world. In the box garden world, the human final trial is a special existence. To defeat, kill, or even overcome the other party requires special conditions. The most critical condition is that you must have the identity of a human. The human final trial, in the shaped moon world, is just a title that Wuming casually said. It has no special power, so humans do not need to overcome it personally. Seeing the doubts on their faces, Wuming directly gave an example. The first Hassan you have seen is the crown assassin. These words directly made Gudatsi and Matthew almost fall to the ground. They knew that the first Hassan was very strong, but they didn't expect the other party to have such an identity. In other words, the reason why the first Hassan helped us is because of the appearance of one of the human evils. However, no one answered Gudatsi's question, because the people present were very clear that Tiamat had undergone a qualitative change. She was no longer a simple human evil. Even the first Hassan couldn't even get close to Tiamat. All of this was attributed to the root black mud. And it was precisely because of this that Wuming took all the burden on himself. Emotionally, only Wuming could deal with Tiamat, who was infected with the root black mud. Others were easily eroded by the black mud and assimilated. Reasonably, the root black mud and Wuming had a great relationship. The reason why Tiamat was infected with the root black mud may have an indirect relationship with Wuming. Therefore, Wuming had to take on this burden. In short, my trump card can deal with Tiamat. You just need to be responsible for covering me. Chapter 10:15. Wuming said as he stretched out his hands and rubbed Gudatsi and Matthew's little heads. In fact, Wuming didn't mention one thing. He was worried that Tiamat had other means. Therefore, Wuming chose to let himself, the only one who was not afraid of the black root soil, face Tiamat, so as not to let other people have an accident. After being attached by the black root soil, in addition to being hostile to Wuming, their own abilities would also be changed or enhanced. That is, the enemy who was already very powerful would become even stronger. As the god of creation, Tiamat was already very strong, and with the blessing of the black root soil, she would definitely become stronger, and maybe she would have some new tricks. The best way was to let some people stay in the Uruk. Wuming had already talked to Gilgamesh about this issue last night. Therefore, Gilgamesh directly ordered, "Now let's discuss the problem of grouping. After that, let's face the god of creation and launch the final attack." The humans in the Uruk were still doing their duty, and even most of the soldiers were arranged by Gilgamesh to do something within their ability. Only some soldiers were still guarding the 360-degree city wall surrounding the Uruk, and their task was only to be stationed on the city wall to monitor the movements of the Ramu army outside. After all, ordinary human soldiers were not useful at all in this counterattack strategy. Although it was cruel to say that, human soldiers couldn't do anything in the face of the Ramu army except to die and increase the combat power of the Ramu army. On the city wall in the southwest corner of the Uruk, Gilgamesh, Gudatsi, Matthew, the followers, and several Quizzards pterosaurs gathered together. However, everyone was clearly divided into 2 teams, and stood in front of Gilgamesh. Quizzard, Ishtar, Gudatsi, Matthew, Merlin, Nuwakamaru, and Musasobo Benkei were responsible for covering Wuming. Enkidu, Funbaba, Leonidas I, Anna, and Leopard Man were responsible for guarding the Uruk with Gilgamesh. Quizzard and Ishtar were very powerful goddesses, so naturally, they wouldn't choose to stay behind. Although Nuwakamaru was a general-like figure, his class was rider, and his mobility wasn't low, he was more suitable for taking the initiative to attack. After Musasobo Benkei overcame his fear, he had to follow Nuwakamaru no matter when and where, unless he died. Nuwakamaru had to admit that this made her feel very helpless. Although she was very pleased that Sea Lord Changlu had become so brave, There was no need for him to become so excessive. It was almost becoming an obsession. Therefore, Nwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei were assigned to the attack team, and Leonidas I was forced to stay behind because of his strong defensive ability. Enkidu and Funbaba were instructed by Wuming to stay behind, and Anna also stayed behind because of Wuming's concern. After all, Anna still needed to protect the Holy Grail where Sakura Madu was. As for the Leopard Man, he was instructed by Quizzard to stay behind. According to Quizzard's words, don't underestimate the Leopard Man, however. Anyone could tell that this wasn't the real reason. In short, Wuming was relieved to have a good defensive team guarding the Uruk. Moreover, there was also Zhuge Kongming, who hadn't shown his face since returning to the Uruk. Wuming believed that even if there was an accident, the Uruk would be safe with the presence of staying behind. As for why Merlin joined the attack team, it was entirely because he was coerced by Wuming. With Gilgamesh and Zhuge Kongming, there was no need for Merlin to stay behind at all. In addition, Merlin had been pretending to be weak, so Wuming, who was a little unhappy, made this decision. Finally, it was Gudatsi and Matthew. Gudatsi and Matthew could stay in the Uruk. There was no need for them to go out and take risks. Although Gudatsi and Matthew's decision was strongly opposed by the two at first, after listening to Gudatsi's reason, the way everyone looked at Gudatsi changed. Human evil needs to be overcome by humans. I won't and don't want to escape. Even if the main attacker was Wuming, Gudatsi believed that as the only master of mankind and one of the last remaining humans, she had to bear witness to all this. It didn't matter even if the end was really death. Wuming was very sure that Gudatsi was touched by his previous words. Although he was worried about Gudatsi's safety, Wuming also felt gratified for Gudatsi at the same time. It was the kind of gratification that one would feel when seeing their younger sister grow up. And not only Wuming, but the others were also touched by this. If Quizzard and Ishtar still regarded Gudatsi as an immature little girl before, now, they have regarded Gudatsi as a real qualified master. Matthew was affected by Gudatsi's strong inner feelings, and supported Gudatsi's idea. Moreover, as Gudatsi's follower, Matthew had no reason to let his master go to the front line alone. Therefore, Matthew would also follow Quizzard and others to cover Wuming. For the decision of the two, Gilgamesh also praised Gudatsi and Matthew, saying that there really are people in the future who didn't let this king down. At this moment, Gilgamesh faced the people who were divided into two teams and repeated the content of the plan. The defense team will stay with this king in Uruk to prevent accidents or provide support. The attack team needs to take Quizzard's pterosaur to the Persian Gulf, and then fully cover Hyunryong to release his trump card to eliminate Tiamat. Of course, your own safety is the prerequisite, that's all. Is there a problem? No. Although only Gudatsi and Matthew answered, in fact, Gilgamesh was talking to Gudatsi and Matthew. After all, everyone else was a servant. To put it bluntly, the servant's body was not the servant's body. If they died, they would die, and there would be no image. But if Gudatsi and Matthew as human beings had an accident, there would be no room for recovery. Then, Roman's voice came from Gudatsi's bracelet. According to the detection, the number of Ramu on the land has exceeded 300 million, and it is still increasing. The speed of the increase of Ramu is also rising rapidly. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci in Chaldea looked at the number of Ramu on the screen that was still increasing, and they couldn't help but frown. Although this was bad news, there was also good news at the same time. However, these Ramu can only move on the ground. There are no aerial units yet. After all, there was already the winged mermaid Kururu that could fly in the sky, so Roman also paid attention to it. But there is no guarantee that there will not be any enemy flying units, so when you get close to Tiamat, you must be very careful. Don't relax your vigilance against the Ramu just because they can fly. Leonardo da Vinci also warned. Of course, he was still talking to Gudatsi and Matthew. Yes, we understand, Leonardo da Vinci. Gudatsi nodded seriously. Finally, as the Uruk king, Gilgamesh issued the final order. So let's go, everyone. This king is looking forward to your triumphant return. Chapter 10:16. The three Quetzalcoatlus carried Gudatsi, Matthew, Nuwakamaru, Musasobo Benkei, and Merlin respectively. Quizzard rode on her exclusive Quetzalcoatlus and flew into the sky with the 5 of them. Ishtar and Wuming both had their own means of flight, so they didn't need Quizzard's Quetzalcoatlus. Under the gaze of the few people stationed in Uruk led by Gilgamesh, the 4 Quetzalcoatlus, Tianzhou, and a figure who flew into the sky without catching any tools left one after another. Thus, the plan to counterattack Tiamat officially began. In a place where no one could see, Gilgamesh's mouth moved slightly. The future of mankind, please. Because Rama didn't have the ability to fly, and Kururu was close to extinction, the attack team didn't encounter any obstacles in the sky. They soon arrived at the original Persian Gulf coastline. The reason why it was called the original Persian Gulf coastline was because this place had long been submerged by the sea of black mud, and the sky had long been covered by dark clouds, and no trace of sunlight could be seen. Roman, who had repeatedly confirmed the location through the electronic map in Chaldea, spoke with great certainty from Gadatsi's bracelet. "It's here." Looking at her bracelet, Gadatsi nodded, then looked at Wuming, who was flying beside her. "From here on out, we must be vigilant." After all, the real sea was in front of them, and the depth was different from the submerged land. There was no guarantee that there would be something hidden. In that case, let's fly higher first. After Quizzard finished speaking, the 4 Quetzalcoatlus all flew higher. Gadatsi was wearing a special magic dress made by Leonardo da Vinci. Even if they flew higher, it wouldn't affect Gadatsi's breathing. Ishtar also increased his altitude. On the other hand, Wu Ming did not increase his altitude. In fact, he even lowered his altitude. That's right, he did this to cover everyone, which was the so-called bait. Danger was often called danger, because it was often hidden in the dark. If the hidden danger could be brought to the light, then Gadatsi and the others would be much safer. Naturally, Wu Ming, who was the strongest, would take the risk. And Wu Ming didn't believe that there was no danger in the sea of black mud. Sure enough, a mouthful of black mud suddenly jumped out of the black mud and bit at Wu Ming. It wasn't exactly a bite because this bloody mouth could swallow Wu Ming in one bite. The kind. Assassin. Gadatsi, who was high in the sky, couldn't help but shout. She didn't see Wu Ming escape from this giant mouth. Could Wu Ming have been eaten? The answer was of course no. "Senior, look over there. Senior Villo is there." Matthew touched Gadatsi and pointed to the sky in the distance. Wu Ming's figure was floating there steadily, and beside Wu Ming was a dark purple portal. So Assassin managed to escape. I almost forgot about that ability of his. Phew, Gadatsi was relieved and took a deep breath. But what is this thing? Gudazi was naturally talking about the big mouth of the muddy basin below. "That's the mouth of a magical beast," Ishtar, who was holding Anna on her horse, said quietly as she flew to Gadatsi and Matthew's side. "The mouth of a magical beast?" This frightened the 2 girls. The mouth below was so big that it could eat 4 or 5 people in one bite. How big was the body of such a magical beast? Gadatsi and Matthew weren't the only ones who wanted to see the true face of this magical beast. Others also wanted to know, including Wu Ming. He wanted to see what the true face of this magical beast that he couldn't detect with his mental strength was. At that moment, Wu Ming waved his hand, and a book full of ancient meanings suddenly appeared in Wu Ming's hand. This was a nameless spell book. Every page represented a magic spell, and the further down the page, the higher the level of the magical beast, and the more powerful the spell was. The book moved without wind, and the pages were flipped. Finally, it stopped on a page. This page represented a supreme spell, and it was the kind that didn't require the skill to be shaken, and could be used directly. Then, Wu Ming tore off this page, and threw it into the portal beside him that hadn't closed yet. "Pa!" Wu Ming snapped his fingers, and the portal closed immediately. However, in the next second, the huge closed mouth suddenly expanded, then suddenly contracted, and then expanded again. The huge mouth opened towards the sky, and the blue and white light of destruction shot straight into the sky. With the huge mouth as the center, the sea of black mud also shook violently. The light of destruction brushed past the feathered serpent that Gadatsi and Matthew were riding, and it gave Gadatsi, Matthew, and the winged serpent a fright. "Fufu!" Fufu suddenly jumped out of Matthew's shield and held a few times at the huge mouth below. It seemed that he was also frightened. Fufu, did you hide in the storage compartment of my shield again? Matthew's shield had been modified by Leonardo da Vinci. It could be used to store supplies or to store recycled holy grails, and Fufu had hidden in it more than once. Worried that Fufu would accidentally fall, Matthew hurriedly hugged Fufu in his arms. You should have stayed in Uruk, Fufu. However, it was useless to say anything at this moment. The key was the true face of the magical beast with the huge mouth. It was a huge dog. Or rather, it was the World of Warcraft Eulidium. Roar! Due to the influence of Wu Ming's supreme spell, a lot of the black mud on the huge mouth was shaken off, and because of the shaking, the body under the huge mouth was also exposed. It was a huge red-haired dog on all fours, and there was even a lot of black mud on its red hair. The World of Warcraft Eulidium. Godotzi couldn't believe it. This was a magical beast that was even bigger than the magical beast commander. At this moment, the winged serpent carrying Merlin approached, and Merlin's voice also reached Godotzi's ears. This is the real son that Tiamat gave birth to alone, one of the 11 sons of Tiamat, the World of Warcraft Eulidium. That's right, it was neither a mass-produced magical beast, nor a so-called magical beast commander, but one of the 11 sons of Tiamat, the World of Warcraft Eulidium. I'm afraid that this Black Sea has already become Tiamat's nest. Roman's voice also came from the bracelet. And Tiamat has probably produced all the other magical beasts, Leonardo da Vinci said. As if confirming Leonardo da Vinci's words, Eulidium howled. A whoa! Accompanied by this wolf-like howl, huge figures emerged from the sea of black mud one after another. Chapter 10:17. One after another, huge figures emerged from the sea of black mud. Black mud fell from their bodies bit by bit, revealing their figures. Eulidium, who had the appearance of a wolf dog, the venomous snake Bashmu, the huge sun lion Ugal, the three-horned lion dragon Ugal, the seven-headed snake Muxiumafu, the demonic bull Catholicu, who had abandoned the appearance of a human bull and appeared on all fours Kitabliru, who had also abandoned the appearance of a scorpion and turned into a giant scorpion, Meshuxiu, who had 4 legs, the angry snake Kururu, who had abandoned the appearance of a mermaid and turned into a giant fish, beast, Debrutu, who had obtained the appearance of a shark and was known as the Tempest, and Tiamat's last son, the Chaos Mudman with the same name and identity as the Father of Gods, Ramu. These were the 11 sons of Tiamat. At the same time, they were also the existences that prevented Wu Ming from getting close to Tiamat. Godotzi and the others had to protect Wu Ming from the danger he had to face. Trouble. Even Wu Ming did not expect that the 11 sons of Tiamat would all appear. However, this was probably the power of the black mud that sped up the birth of Tiamat's new 11 sons. The reason why it was called the new 11 sons was because the real 11 sons had died long ago. Moreover, these 11 magical beasts were more or less different from the ones recorded in the historical myths. At this moment, the bodies of the magical beasts were basically extremely huge, and the humanoid magical beasts had all turned into their beast forms. The formless Debrutu had also turned into a giant shark. Obviously, this was a temporary change made by Tiamat. After all, this was the only way they were real magical beasts. However, Wu Ming was more concerned about the Ramu. It wasn't much different from the other Ramu in Mesopotamia. At the very least, it wasn't as large as the other Ramu. It was about the same size as the other Ramu, but it was also different from the other mass-produced Ramu. This Rama's body was not as weak as other mass-produced Ramu. On the contrary, this Rama's body was abnormally strong. It was even more fit than a bodybuilder. Wu Ming was sure that this guy was not just for show, but for real. In addition, this Ramu also had a pair of large wings on its back, but they were curled up, so it was hard to tell how big they were. In short, among the 11 magical beasts, Wu Ming felt that this Ramu was the strongest. WMBFLL, YBFDFCXXDMQCSDJH, YBFQWLK, CDXMRL. The Rama said something to the other magical beasts, and the 11 magical beasts immediately divided into 2 groups. 5 magical beasts advanced towards the Uruk. Wu Ming, who could understand the Rama's words, understood the other party's meaning. They wanted to split into two groups. One group would go to the Uruk to completely destroy the humans, and the other group would stay to deal with them. It seemed that these 11 magical beasts had not been lurking for a long time. They were probably just born not long ago. Otherwise, they wouldn't have waited until Wuming and the others attacked the Uruk before going to the Uruk. After all, if 11 of them attacked the Uruk together, the Uruk's light film would most likely not be able to stop them. Fortunately, Wuming had the foresight to let Enkidu, Funbaba, and the others stay in the Uruk. Although it was not foolproof, it was enough. These 11 magical beasts were extremely powerful. Wuming even had the idea that if they fought alone, Quizzard and Ishtar might not necessarily be the opponents of these magical beasts. However, their goal was not to kill these 11 magical beasts. As long as they delayed these magical beasts and let Wuming deal with Tiamat during this time, everything would be over. However, these magical beasts seemed to be quite smart. After the 5 magical beasts left for the Uruk, the remaining 6 magical beasts all rushed towards Wuming. Only Wuming had the ability to threaten Tiamat, which the magical beasts knew very well. However, Wuming appeared next to Gadatsi with a teleportation portal, causing the 6 magical beasts to miss their target. Assassin, what should we do now? Gadatsi was a little anxious at this moment. However, there was no other way because Roman had been relaying information about the enemy. Each of these 11 magical beasts has magical power comparable to, or even surpassing the Holy Grail. Their strength has even reached the level of the King of Gods. Even Quizzard, the Quetzalcoatl, has a very low chance of winning against one of them. If the goddess Ishtar faces one of them, she is likely to be killed. It's really over this time. Roman's anxious and panicked voice kept coming out of Gadatsi's bracelet. Are these magical beasts so powerful? Matthew was also shocked. After all, she was still immature. She could only sense that these magical beasts were very dangerous, but she did not know how dangerous they were. Don't forget that even Ishtar's father is Tiamat's grandson. These magical beasts are Tiamat's sons. It's understandable that they have the power of the King of Gods. Wuming's words were not unreasonable. If Tiamat's magical beasts were weak, then they were not qualified to fight against the heavenly gods. After all, they would be killed directly by the heavenly gods. Being able to fight against the heavenly gods meant that the 11 sons of Tiamat were very powerful. It could only be said that the previous magical beast commanders were the weaker versions of these 11 magical beasts, and the mass-produced magical beasts were the extremely weak versions of these 11 magical beasts. These 11 magical beasts were the 11 sons of Tiamat. No, it should be strengthened by the black mud. Otherwise, Tiamat would not have given birth to these the 11 sons so quickly, and these the 11 sons would not have such powerful strength. It could be said that if these 11 magical beasts replaced the original the 11 sons, the scales of victory might have tilted towards Tiamat's side. Therefore, these magical beasts must have been strengthened by the black mud. Assassin, go directly to Tiamat. We'll hold these magical beasts back. Gadatsi made a prompt decision and issued an order. However, as a master, Gadatsi was still too inexperienced. However, Wuming shook his head. It's impossible for you to beat these guys. You won't even be able to drag it out for long. Not to mention anything else, Gadatsi's combat power was 0. Even if Matthew was included, excluding Wuming, there were only 5 of them, and there were 6 magical beasts here. Roman's words just now were very clear. Quizzard's chances of winning were very low, and Ishtar might even be killed directly. There was one more thing that Roman didn't mention. Even Merlin could only rely on illusion to survive. It was difficult to win in a 1-on-1 situation, let alone a 5-on-6 situation. What's more, there was another extremely frustrating thing. 5 against 6 was just a hypothesis, because Matthew, Nuwakamaru, and Musasobo Benkei were useless at this moment. Therefore, the real situation was actually 2 against 6. Chapter 10:18. Then what do we do now? Everyone turned their attention to Wuming, including Merlin. Wuming looked at the 6 magical beasts that were charging at them again, thought for a moment, and then said something that made everyone dumbfounded. I'll hold off these 6 magical beasts, you guys go snipe Tiamat. As soon as he said that, everyone's eyes widened. Wait a minute, you're going to deal with 6 magical beasts? Gudatsi said worriedly. The strength of these magical beasts was obvious to all. This was no joke. I'm afraid we can't kill Tiamat. This sentence came from Merlin. The 6 magical beasts only attacked Wu Ming and ignored the others. This meant that only Wu Ming had the ability to threaten Tiamat. If they couldn't even defeat these magical beasts, how could they deal with Tiamat? There was another point that others didn't know, but Merlin knew very well. First, Hassan couldn't even get close to Tiamat now, let alone them. Without the strength, they probably couldn't even get close. How could they fight? However, Wu Ming's words changed. That's why I asked you guys to snipe. That's right, Wu Ming didn't think that they could get close to Tiamat, but they didn't need to, they could just snipe from afar. Immediately, everyone turned their attention to Ishtar. Ishtar was stunned at first, then held her head and looked like she was about to break down. Wait a minute, I can't even defeat these magical beasts. How can I deal with Tiamat? Ishtar's eyes were filled with tears, and she looked like she was going to die. This was a good reason, but don't you still have Gugalana? Wu Ming spread his hands and suddenly looked like he didn't care. TSK. Suddenly Ishtar's body froze. However, Gudatsi and Matthew looked happy. Right, I almost forgot that Miss Ishtar has the Bull of Heaven. Ishtar. It's up to you now. The two of them cheered Ishtar on. If it doesn't work, we'll just use Gugalin to escape and switch places with me. Without waiting for Ishtar's response, Wu Ming turned around and flew downwards. Because the 6 magical beasts had already arrived. Good luck, Mistress of the Heavens, Ishtar. I have high hopes for you. After Wu Ming said some words of encouragement, he directly started fighting with the 6 magical beasts. There's no time to lose. Let's go over first. At that moment, Quizzard also seized the opportunity created by Wu Ming and commanded the pterosaurs to fly towards Tiamat. Wait a minute. Ishtar's sorrowful cries served as a prelude to the battle between Wu Ming and the 6 magical beasts. On the Uruk side, Gilgamesh had already returned to the top of the divine tower. He did not do anything and just closed his eyes and waited quietly. Enkidu and Funbaba were playing by the side, while Leonidas I, Anna, and the leopard man stayed on the southwest wall of the Uruk. At some point, Gilgamesh's aura changed and then Enkidu spoke. Gil, what are you worried about? However, Gilgamesh, who opened his eyes, shook his head. It's just a bunch of random thoughts. In response, Enkidu smiled mysteriously. In that case, Enkidu decided to change the topic. Sir Hyenryong will definitely succeed. We just need to protect the Uruk, or rather, protect you, the king of humans in this era. It's about time. Gilgamesh, who was leaning against the throne, rested his face on his arm and glanced toward the southwest. Boom! The sound of a boulder hitting the ground echoed in the sky, and the entire Uruk was shaken. Looks like it's here. Enkidu stopped smiling and hugged Funbaba. That's right, both Enkidu and Gilgamesh knew that the Uruk would definitely be attacked. Enkidu's judgment came from following Wu Ming, while Gilgamesh's judgment was purely clairvoyant. Let's go, Enkidu. This king wants to see how those beasts attack this king's Uruk. Gilgamesh said, standing up with the help of the handrail and walking down the steps. In response, Enkidu smiled helplessly. I told you to stay on the city wall, and now you want to go over. Idiot, how can this king stay on the front line all the time? Although Gilgamesh said so, as his only friend, Enkidu knew that Gilgamesh needed to rest after coming back. Gilgamesh just took a nap, and the reason why Enkidu took the initiative to speak was because he sensed that Gilgamesh was awake. As Gilgamesh's only friend, Enkidu could sense Gilgamesh's condition even through his aura. Okay, let's go. Enkidu, who also understood that Gilgamesh was at Sundra, stopped discussing this topic and followed Gilgamesh with Funbaba in his arms. Outside the southwest city wall of the Uruk, near Nabistan's Fong, 5 huge monsters were constantly destroying Nabistan's Fong, trying to let the sea of black mud flow through. Nabistan's Fong was not strong enough to withstand the attacks of these 5 monsters. Just the collision of their bodies was enough to destroy Nabistan's Fong. The sea of black mud began to move toward the Uruk, and some fragments of Nabistan's Fong that were scattered on the sea of black mud were picked up by one of the monsters. This was a huge bull with a pair of fierce horns. It was Catholic, one of the 11 sons of Tiamat. Obviously, even if Catholic transformed from his human form to his beast form, he was still the strongest among the 11 sons. No, it should be said that he was stronger in his beast form. He was holding a sharp fragment of Nabistan's Fong, and he suddenly threw his head toward the Uruk sky. Whoosh! The fragment rushed toward the Uruk at high speed like a bullet. When the fragment reached the highest point, it began to fall in an arc, and then directly entered the light film of the Uruk. It fell heavily in an open space, smashing a big hole. In the middle of the street not far away, there was also a big hole, and in the hole was another fragment of Nabistan's Fong. Obviously, these two fragments had entered the Uruk through the same method. But fortunately, these two fragments happened to fall in an open space or even on the street, so there were no casualties. As for the humans in the Uruk, under the guidance of the soldiers, they were constantly retreating toward the central tower. A beautiful woman wearing a veil was saying something loudly. "Hurry up, everyone, we'll be safe once we enter the tower." This was Siduri, and she was also giving orders. The underground of the tower had space for thousands of people to temporarily take refuge. Although it was a little difficult to let everyone in the Uruk take refuge in it, the other rooms on the ground of the tower could also be used for refuge. As the central building of the Uruk, the tower was naturally strong. As long as they didn't hide on a floor that was too high, even if the fragment of Nabistan's Fong fell, it wouldn't cause any harm to the people hiding in it. At the thought that the people would soon be safe, Siduri couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. However, at this moment, a sound of something breaking through the air came from above Siduri's head. Siduri couldn't help but look up. It was another fragment of Nabistan's Fong, and the landing site was where she was. Chapter 10:19. However, before the fragment landed, a purple figure leaped towards the fragment. With a flash of a blade, the fragment turned into fragments and fell to the ground. "Are you all right?" Anna's figure landed in front of Siduri. Her scythe indicated that it was Anna who saved Siduri. "I'm fine, Miss Anna. Thank you so much." Siduri bowed to Anna to express her gratitude. "Let's leave quickly. The Uruk is in danger now." Anna blushed and turned her head away. She couldn't help but put on her hood. Yes, Miss Anna should be careful too. However, Siduri didn't retreat in the direction of the tower. Instead, she ran towards the crowd. She needed to guide the crowd. This was not only her duty as a witch chief, but also her duty as a human to help her fellow humans. Seeing that Siduri was covering some of the frightened crowd while leaving, Anna took off her hood. "That's why I hate humans the most." However, Anna's heart was the complete opposite of what she said. However, she didn't have time to sigh. A few more fragments fell from the sky. Anna jumped up again and prepared to use her undying slaughter blade. He parted to cut these fragments into pieces one by one. However, these were still fragments of Nabistan's Fong. It was difficult for Anna to cut them into pieces. However, if she didn't cut them into pieces, the fragments would destroy the surroundings and affect the people who hadn't retreated in time. Not good. Finally, something unexpected happened. A smaller fragment followed behind a larger one. Anna didn't notice it because she wasn't paying attention. Anna, who thought that she had cut the last fragment of Nabistan's Fong, was gradually falling to the ground. At this moment, a tiger's roar echoed through the sky. Roar! Ka-cha-bang! Finally, the last piece of debris was completely shattered. Along with Anna, a yellow leopard fell to the ground. Although she made a tiger's roar. As expected, we still have to rely on the warriors of the forest. The great leopard man. Roar! Anna looked at the leopard man in disdain. She didn't say anything. After all, it was a fact that he helped her. Anna turned to look at the sky. It was definitely not a coincidence that the two fragments had overlapped. Anna was very sure of this. Then there was only one explanation. The enemy's intelligence isn't lower than humans. As expected of Tiamat's magical beast, Gilgamesh said as he walked over with Enkidu, who was holding Fimbaba. He and Enki both saw what happened just now. And he also saw that it was the doing of those 5 magic beasts. Because it's a pure physical attack, the light barrier didn't have any effect. It seems like the opponent is very clear about the defensive means of the light barrier. Gilgamesh couldn't help but frown. It wasn't scary that the enemy was strong. What was scary was that the enemy was strong and smart. At this moment, the 5 magical beasts outside were such enemies. The magical beasts this time are fundamentally different from the previous ones. Let's go. Follow this king to the city wall to take a look. As for the fragments falling from the sky, Gilgamesh had already activated a few divine power seals, Dinger, which were enough to destroy the fragments of Nabistan's Fong. Although the civilians and soldiers had entered the holy tower to take refuge, Gilgamesh could easily activate a few divine power seals, Dinger, by himself. He didn't need any soldiers. Plus, now that all the humans were gathered in the holy tower, even if 1 or 2 fragments fell, it wouldn't be a big deal. The only thing left was to take care of the 5 magical beasts that kept throwing fragments of Nabistan's Fong at the Uruk. Because the journey wasn't far, Gilgamesh and the others soon arrived at the city wall. The magical beasts probably realized that throwing fragments of Nabistan's Fong was no longer effective. Plus, they had basically used up all the fragments of Nabistan's Fong. Hence, the magical beasts completely gave up on the idea. However, more importantly, because of the damage to Nabistan's Fong, the sea of black mud had arrived in front of the Uruk. Although the light membrane protecting the Uruk was Wu Ming's noble artifact, the sea of black mud was created by Tiamat's authority. Even Gilgamesh doubted that the light membrane enveloping the Uruk could stop the sea of black mud. However, Gilgamesh believed that even if it couldn't stop it, it could still stop it for a while. As long as Wu Ming killed Tiamat in a while, everything would be fine. Sure enough, when the sea of black mud came into contact with the light membrane, the two seemed to have a chemical reaction. The light membrane sizzled and flashed like an alarm. Although the sea of black mud didn't enter the Uruk, it seemed that the light membrane wouldn't last long. However, at this moment, Gilgamesh and Enkidu suddenly sensed something and looked at somewhere in the sky in disbelief. There, a petite figure with a strong divinity suddenly appeared. Earth Wave! Accompanied by a delicate but firm voice, the ground around the Uruk suddenly changed. The soil outside the Uruk became active like an ocean. It directly cut off the sea of black mud from the ground and formed a trapezoidal dam, blocking the sea of black mud outside. The sea of black mud that was cut off between the Uruk and the dam was transported by the soil and thrown back. This divinity. Gilgamesh showed an interesting expression. It's Lord Hyenryong's, Enkidu said. However, compared to Gilgamesh, Enkidu was more familiar with the person who used this power. The petite figure in the sky was Wu Ming's younger sister, Shitsuki Meiyu. On Wu Ming's side, Wu Ming, who didn't know about Meiyu's arrival, was contending with the 6 magic beasts while covering for Gadatsi and the others as they left. Looking in the direction in which Gadatsi and the others left, Wu Ming could no longer see them. Only then did he look at the 6 magic beasts seriously. The magic beasts left behind to deal with Wu Ming were not simple. Kitabliru, Kururuum Debrutu Basumuuj and Ramu. The first 5 magic beasts were among the strongest among the 11 magic beasts. However, Ramu caught Wu Ming's attention more. Apart from other reasons, the existence that was like a strengthened version of Ramu was like the center of the magic beasts. How could Wu Ming not pay attention to it? Moreover, when Gadatsi and the others left, Ramu just waved its hand lightly. Hundreds of winged Ramu flew out from the sea of black mud below and flew in the direction that Gadatsi and the others left. This guy actually had magic beasts that could fly. How could Wu Ming not be shocked? Chapter 10:20. It seemed that even if Wu Ming stayed behind, the other party still wouldn't allow anyone to get close to Tiamat. But fortunately, it was only some winged Ramu that dealt with Gadatsi and the others, and not the 11 magical beasts. Although those mass-produced Ramu weren't weak, they were still too weak compared to the 11 magical beasts, so Wu Ming believed that Gadatsi and the others would be fine. There were 2 reasons why Wu Ming let Gadatsi and the others deal with Tiamat. First of all, Gadatsi and the others definitely wouldn't be able to kill Tiamat. And Wuming instructed Ishtar to attack from a distance only to give Gadotsi and the others a way out. After all, it would be easier for them to escape by pulling the distance. And why did Wuming let Gadotsi and the others go even though he knew that they couldn't kill Tiamat? The second reason was that Wuming wanted to take advantage of this time to kill these 6 magical beasts. So no matter what, Wuming had to speed up during the time when Gadotsi and the others were away, and try to kill these 6 magical beasts as quickly as possible. After all, it was impossible for them to defeat the magical beasts, and even the survival of Gadotsi and the others was a problem. So these 6 magical beasts must all be eliminated by Wuming. Even if they couldn't kill all of them, they had to leave a number that Gadotsi and the others could deal with before turning to deal with Tiamat. And next, Wuming had to use the power of God to deal with this group of children of the Creator. And the first to bear the brunt was Ramu. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people, all fear me with wings. My wings will bring you curses. Evil people can't hit me. As the words were chanted, Wuming's figure suddenly disappeared. However, in the next second, Wuming's figure appeared in front of Ramu, who was standing among the other magical beasts. And Wuming had already stretched out his right hand and grabbed Ramu's head. The speed brought by the phoenix incarnation wasn't something that magical beasts could react to. After all, the phoenix incarnation was related to time, so how could it let the other party react? In an instant, Wuming came into contact with seraphic speed, and chanted another word. I am the strongest, and I hold all the victory in my hands. No matter if it's a human or a demon, I will defeat any enemy who is in my way. Poochie. Like crushing a watermelon, Lachma's head, which Wuming was grabbing, was crushed by Wuming's arm, which was filled with the power of a giant. Purple blood splattered everywhere, but not a single drop landed on Wuming's body. Wuming had already set up a telekinesis wall in front of him. Roar! Roar! Roar, roar, roar! Roar, roar! Rama's sudden death scared the other magical beasts. In their senses, Wuming disappeared in an instant. Rama's head exploded, and Wuming appeared among the 5 magical beasts. Giant with unparalleled divine power, please help me. With the words, a giant golden arm attached to Wuming's left hand. Then Wuming suddenly turned around and waved the giant golden arm around. And the 5 magical beasts were suddenly thrown out. Looking at the 5 magical beasts standing on the sea of black mud and surrounding Wuming, Wuming turned off the giant incarnation, and the golden arm on his left hand disappeared. Thou hast violated the contract and brought evil to the world. Lord's Day, sinners will be punished. Then, holding Rama's headless body, Wuming began to chant again. Crush its back, dig out its tendons, bones, hair and brain, and trample on its blood and mud. If I am the one who cannot get close to the darkness, I will follow the words of the Lord and destroy thee. Suddenly, something like a black hole appeared on Rama's headless body. In an instant, the body was sucked into the black hole and disappeared. Then, as if quite tired, Wuming shook his right hand. It must be said that Rama's body was as tough as its appearance. It was far from being comparable to the mass-produced Ramu. Although Wuming easily crushed Rama's head, it consumed a lot of Wuming's energy. Wuming's arm was also tired, otherwise, Wuming would not have changed his arm to attack the other 5 magical beasts. Wuming did not underestimate the 11 magical beasts. On the contrary, they were very important. After all, they came out of the sea of black mud. Using the phoenix incarnation that had never been used in front of magical beasts to get close to Ramu and catch it by surprise. Then, using the giant incarnation, coupled with a trace of the power of the source of the black mud, he successfully crushed Rama's head. Finally, he used the annihilation incarnation to destroy Rama's headless body. After all, a magical beast's vitality was very strong. However, Wuming could not guarantee that Rama did not have any special abilities. Wuming was afraid that the headless Ramu could come back to life. These were enough to see Wuming's importance to Ramu, and Rama died without playing any role. No, thinking about it carefully, it was still useful. The other 5 magical beasts knew about Wuming's methods. If Wuming wanted to use this method to kill other magical beasts, it would most likely not work. However, even so, it was worth it to kill Ramu, who gave Wuming a sense of importance. Rubbing his right wrist, Wuming looked at Baxiomu. Baxiomu was his next target. After all, Wuming had 12 incarnations. When Wuming killed a magical beast, Godatsu's side did not have any accidents as Wuming expected. Although the mass-produced Ramu was powerful, and the mass-produced Ramu with wings was even more powerful, they were still not as good as the 11 magical beasts. Probably because Quizzard and Ishtar couldn't beat the 11 magical beasts, the two of them worked extra hard to deal with these mass-produced Ramu. Or it could be said that they were venting. Die. Ishtar frantically attacked the mass-produced Ramu with anima. With a face full of resentment, she kept muttering this sentence. Although she couldn't hit Ramu every time. As long as she hit Ramu, the opponent would be killed. This was enough to prove that Ishtar put a lot of magic into each attack. And Quizzard used the mass-produced Ramu as a stepping stone, constantly moving between the Ramu. And every time Quizzard moved, a Ramu would fall. These Ramu were directly killed by Quizzard's fatal wrestling skills. Two goddesses. So scary. Godatsu and Matthew looked at Ishtar and Quizzard with some fear and gulped. Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei quietly stayed on the pterosaur's back. Because the two goddesses were venting, although they didn't have a chance to attack, they had some free time. Ahahaha, almost all the enemies have been wiped out. Merlin laughed. Sure enough, after Merlin finished speaking, Godatsu found that there was only one Ramu left. And it seemed to be dumbfounded, flying there motionlessly. But it didn't matter. Anyway, this Ramu had to face the two goddesses venting. When it finally reacted, it couldn't help but shudder. Then a golden light flashed, and it fell into darkness. Chapter 10:21. The last Rama died after being attacked by the two goddesses. Ishtar, who couldn't find a target, stopped shooting, and Quizzard, who also couldn't find a target, returned to the back of her pterosaur. At this moment, everyone flew side by side. I'm in a good mood, that's right, the two goddesses smiled like goddesses. Godatsu and Matthew couldn't connect the two goddesses at this moment with the previous two. Godatsu simply changed the topic. I don't know how Assassin is doing. While talking, Godatsu showed a trace of worry. After all, the 6 magical beasts were difficult to deal with for Ishtar and Quizzard, so it was natural for Godatsu to be worried. Senpai, I believe that Senpai Villa will be fine. After all, he has always been very reliable. Matthew clenched his small fist and nodded to Godatsu. In this regard, Ishtar also agreed. Matthew is right. That guy won't do anything that he isn't sure of. Since he chose to deal with the 6 magical beasts, he must have his reasons. Since Ishtar said so, I think Hyunryong will be fine. But I didn't expect you to have so much confidence in Hyunryong. Then, Quizzard also interjected, but her tone was quite mocking. I don't have confidence in him. But if Hyunryong can be defeated so easily, I won't be unable to defeat him for so long in the past. Ishtar crossed her arms and looked proud. Everyone, now is not the time to quarrel. Nuwakamaru said something, but her face was a little ugly. Similarly, Musasobo Benkei, who was still silent, also looked a little ugly. We probably have a problem. At this time Merlin, who was on the back of the pterosaur next to Godatsu, suddenly pointed to the front. His expression was a little ugly. There was no other reason than the place Merlin had pointed to. Godatsu and others looked at the place where Merlin pointed. It was dark. The clouds in the sky gradually turned into dark clouds, and the sky gradually turned scarlet. Under the alternating black and red sky, the Indian Ocean connected to the Persian Gulf was dark. No, it wasn't the Indian Ocean, it was the black mud. The black mud connected the sky and the sea. Not metaphorically, but a real connection. In front of everyone, from the surface of the sea to the black clouds in the sky, it was as if a wall of black mud had formed. All they could see was black mud and nothing else. In a sense, the water and the sky was black. Because the surrounding environment had been turning dark, and Godatsu and others' attention was attracted by Ishtar and Quizzard, they didn't notice this scene. The black mud that formed the water and the sky was faintly creeping. Anyway, in Godatsu's opinion, it was quite disgusting. She now understood why Merlin frowned. After discovering this situation, Quizzard had already stopped the pterosaurs and even faintly retreated. Then, Roman's panicked voice came from Gadotzi's bracelet. Quizzard, retreat quickly. At that moment, Quizzard didn't care whether Roman's words were correct or not. She immediately waved her hand, and the pterosaurs made a sharp turn and flew backward. Gadotzi, who didn't react for a moment, even fell on Matthew due to inertia. Sitting up again, Gadotzi looked at her bracelet in confusion. "Doctor, what's wrong?" "That's right, they only saw the black mud that was the same color as the sky, and there was still some distance between them. Why were they in such a hurry to leave? It was as if the danger was already near them." "I don't know what you saw. Chaldea can't receive the image since you went deep into the Indian Ocean, but fortunately, the instrument is still working as usual." Roman, who was in Chaldea, wiped the sweat on his forehead that appeared out of nowhere, and answered Gadotzi word by word. "The instrument detected that there was a huge amount of magic everywhere around you just now. No, to be precise, you are in a space full of huge magic, and your surroundings are still like this. To make an analogy, you can imagine that you are in the Holy Grail," although the tone was also very serious. Even at a critical moment, Leonardo da Vinci still didn't forget to joke. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci's words made everyone recover from the shock, and then they were shocked again. What they realized was that the magic that was being emitted was probably the black mud around them, and the shock was easier to understand. "Look carefully, the distance around us seems to be dark." Ishtar frowned. The pterosaur had been flying behind them, but they didn't seem to have moved at all. If that's the case. Gadotzi's eyes widened. In the end, Quizzard said a guess that was likely to be the truth. "Maybe we have entered a special space like what Leonardo da Vinci said." They were shocked because they seemed to be trapped on the coast of the Persian Gulf. Wu Ming, holding the holy sword, stood on a huge red-haired monster that looked like a wolf or a dog burning with holy flames. The reddish-yellow flames and the color of the monster reflected on Wu Ming, who was standing on top, and looked particularly sacred. After confirming that the body under him was cold, Wu Ming raised his hand and waved. The sword of salvation released a ray of light and shone on the body. In an instant, the flame transformed by the sun suddenly burned. He was going to use the flame to burn the body of the demonic beast. Every time Wu Ming killed a demonic beast, he would use various means to destroy the body to prevent them from suddenly resurrecting. Then Wu Ming could not help but look at the direction where Gadotzi and the others left. It has been so long, why hasn't Ishtar activated her noble phantasm? There was still a connection between Ishtar and Wu Ming. Once Ishtar activated her noble phantasm, Wu Ming could easily feel it. Wu Ming, who felt that something was not right, was a little uneasy. It seems that there is no time to deal with the remaining 2 demonic beasts. That's right, Wu Ming did not kill the 6 demonic beasts. After Wu Ming killed Ramu, he successively killed Baxiomu, Mdabrutu and Ulidim. Only Musamafu and Kururu were left. Kururu could fly, which meant that it was more agile than Baxiomu and the rest. Musamafu, on the other hand, was cunning and cherished his life. After Wu Ming killed Basomu, he hid in the sea of black mud. Even if he attacked Wu Ming, he would only feign an attack as a cover. After that, he would immediately dive into the depths of the sea of black mud, allowing Umudaburutu, Ulidim, and Kurulu to take charge of the main attacks. After killing Mdabrutu, the remaining 2 demonic beasts, Kururu and Ulidim, panicked. The body under Wu Ming that was about to burn out was Ulidim's. Chapter 1022. Wu Ming took advantage of the moment when Ulidim and Kururu were in a panic, and captured Ulidim in one fell swoop. After fighting for a while, he directly used the Sun Incarnation as his trump card to kill Ulidim. But unfortunately, Kururu also took the opportunity to sneak into the sea of black mud. And Musamafu no longer appeared after Wu Ming killed Mdablutu. It was estimated that Musamafu had sneaked into a deeper place. At this moment, the sea of black mud still had some influence on Wu Ming, so Wu Ming couldn't go deep into the sea of black mud to find Musamafu and Kururu. In addition, Wu Ming noticed that something was wrong with Gadotzi, so he decided to let the 2 monsters go for the time being. He was going to see what happened to Gadotzi and Kururu first. However, at this moment, something unexpected happened to Wuming. The black-purple portal that was under his control suddenly opened automatically beside him. This made Wuming shocked and puzzled. Wuming learned this move from the game system when he transmigrated to another world. In other words, the portal was a unique move. Wuming also taught Demetrius the move system of Yggdrasil, but because Demetrius was a servant, Wuming couldn't be sure whether Demetrius had mastered the magic system of Yggdrasil. However, even if Demetrius had mastered it, she also promised Wuming that she wouldn't spread it out. So who opened the portal that appeared in front of Wuming? In the next second, Wuming got the answer. Brother Wuming? A delicate and excited voice came out from the portal, and then a black-haired, white-robed figure rushed into Wuming's arms from the portal. Wuming instantly understood who came and hugged the person in his arms and rubbed her little head. The person who came was naturally Wuming's cute sister, Shitsuki Mayu. Mayu? Why are you here? Wuming was both puzzled and shocked. This was a singularity, and it was Mesopotamia in BC. Mayu couldn't have come here. As for whether it was true or not, when Mayu shouted Brother Wuming, Wuming knew that the Mayu in his arms was not someone else. It was Brother Wuming's power that brought me here. Mayu's cheeks were slightly red because of Wuming's touch, but she still enjoyed it, like a kitten. When Mayu said this, Wuming suddenly realized that he did give his power to Mayu. After Wuming got rid of Darius, the world of Mayu and Ilya was safe. After that, Wuming left that world and used the black mud to find Gitya. When he left, Wuming asked the young Gilgamesh to give Mayu the rank card with his power. It was a golden caster, magician rank card. Although the crisis in Wuming's world had been solved by Wuming, and Mayu would not have any trouble, Wuming still left his power to Mayu just in case. After that, because of a series of involuntary things, Wuming was a little busy. During this time he did not go back to see Mayu. Wuming also gradually forgot that he gave Mayu the rank card. My rank card suddenly became hot, and then I felt the summoning from the rank card. I thought it was Brother Wuming calling me, so I responded to the summoning. As a result, I appeared next to the blonde Rin in Osaka. God knows what Mayu's expression was when she saw the blonde Rin in Osaka with Wuming's aura. Anyway, Mayu only remembered that she was completely dumbfounded at the time. When Mayu said this, Wuming understood everything. It was probably because Ereshkigal created a chain of summoning when she merged with Wuming's divinity. She inadvertently contacted Mayu, who held Wuming's rank card, and Mayu thought it was Wuming calling her. As a result, she came over in a daze. At this moment, Mayu was a servant's body composed of a rank card and a spirit core, which was somewhat similar to Little Black. Little Black had already installed a magic converter in her body, and now she didn't need to rely on others to replenish her mana. But after all, she still had the body of a servant, unlike the body of an ordinary primary school student like Ilya and Mayu. In the past, Wuming didn't have any means. Now, Wuming could use the power of the source to create a puppet body for Little Black that was 100% similar to the body of a primary school student. Mayu's human body should still be in her world. Even if something happened to Mayu in Wuming's arms, it wouldn't affect Mayu's body. At most, it would cause the rank card to be scrapped. However, Wuming wouldn't let anything happen to Mayu. And the other party isn't Rin in Osaka. She just borrowed Rin in Osaka's appearance. Remember to call her Sister L. Wuming knocked Mayu's little head. I know, Brother Wuming. Don't knock my head all the time. Wuming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He rubbed Mayu's little head again, comforting Mayu's depression of being knocked on the head. You said you appeared next to Ereshkigal. How is Ereshkigal now? Wuming was quite worried about Ereshkigal. Blonde-haired Rin in Osaka. Sister L is now dealing with the demonic beasts in Uruk. She asked me to come and find Brother Wuming to see if there's anything I can help with. However, Wuming had a strange expression. Are you sure Ereshkigal didn't ask you to come and find me to save the day? Wuming almost said this sentence. Can Ereshkigal defeat those 5 demonic beasts? Although Wuming asked cautiously, there was still distrust in his words. It couldn't be helped. Quizzard and Ishtar would have a problem surviving against any one of the demonic beasts. How could Ereshkigal defeat 5 demonic beasts? Mayu pouted and was a little dissatisfied. Brother Wuming, don't underestimate Sister Al. She directly locked the 5 demonic beasts in the underworld. Immediately, Mayu described the whole process of the 5 demonic beasts attacking the Uruk. When the sea of black mud rushed to the Uruk, Mayu cast the servant in the class card, which was Wuming's ability, Yggdrasil system's magic. She raised the ground and intercepted the sea of black mud. After that, Ereshkigal, who received Wuming's divinity, got rid of the restrictions of the underworld and came to the ground. However, Ereshkigal still had a trace of her own divinity, so the underworld still protected Ereshkigal. She successfully launched her underworld authority and locked the 5 demonic beasts in her own underworld. In the underworld, Ereshkigal could be said to be invincible. The 5 demonic beasts were lambs waiting to be slaughtered. However, Wuming was not optimistic about Ereshkigal. After all, these demonic beasts emerged from the sea of black mud. And the essence of the sea of black mud was the black mud, which was the same as Wuming's. Since the 5 demonic beasts were likely not to be suppressed by the underworld, Ereshkigal was in danger. Chapter 10:23. Wuming waved his hand, and a clay tablet unique to Uruk appeared in his hand. The clay tablet was covered with Lune runes, and these runes stored the words that Wuming wanted to say. Mayu, immediately bring this to Gilgamesh, and then look for Ereshkigal. Those demonic beasts are not ordinary demonic beasts, and I'm worried that she might have an accident. After Wuming finished speaking, he handed the clay tablet to Mayu. I understand, Brother Wuming. Mayu nodded with a serious expression. Mayu, who had Wuming's class card, was equivalent to Wuming in the state of caster, magician. Her magic power was almost infinite, and she had mastered Lune magic and Yggdrasil magic. She also had a huge amount of divinity and a dragon's breath, and some of Wuming's noble artifacts. Not to mention fighting against enemies, she had no problem protecting herself. In addition, Mayu was a serious and strict child, so Wuming was very relieved to let Mayu handle this matter. What is Brother Wuming going to do? Mayu asked abruptly, and she seemed a little nervous. Knowing that Mayu was worried about his Wuming could not help but smile, and then he put his hand on Mayu's head. Don't worry, I'm just going to solve a small problem. After this matter is over, don't be in a hurry to go back. Stay in Uruk, and I'll make omelet rice for you alone. That's right, Wuming was going to give Mayu special treatment. Although Mayu was a little embarrassed to leave Ilya and Little Black to eat alone, when she thought that she could have Wuming to herself, Mayu was secretly delighted. Well, I'm waiting for Brother Wuming to make omelet rice for me in Uruk. After saying that with a blush on her cheeks, Mayu opened the portal and went in. In this regard, Wuming showed a warm expression. Sure enough, Mayu has always been very sensible. It was not the matter of making omelet rice for Mayu. Wuming's sensible was that Mayu did not ask much. Anyone could tell that the situation was not good just by looking around. Although it was not a certain death, the dark doomsday scene of the sky and sea was still very unsettling. However, Mayu did not ask anything. She did not ask what was going on here, nor did she ask why Wuming said anything. She only listened to her brother's words, listened to Wuming's words, and did what Wuming told her to do. She was completely like an obedient sister who listened to her brother's words. Or perhaps, this was Mayu's mature side. If it were Little Black, he might not be as good as Mayu. If it were Ilya, it would definitely be worse. Ilya would most likely get to the bottom of it. If she did not do that, Ilya would definitely be distracted or absent-minded. As if imagining Ilya's embarrassed look, Wuming could not help but smile. For the sake of Beauty Tour, for the sake of Ilya and Blackie who aren't here, I have to work harder. After Wuming finished speaking, he landed on the black mud sea and sat on the surface of the sea. First of all, I need to confirm whether Gadatsi and the others are safe. As Wuming said, he raised his arm and turned the back of his hand to himself. Some red marks were clearly visible on the back of Wuming's hand, which was the magic power crystal of Ishtar's command spell that had been used up before. Although it was said to be a command spell, it did not have most of the effects of a command spell. It only had the effect of replenishing the magic power of the servant. Moreover, after these command spells were used up, they could be replenished through the magic power in the body, but they had not been used, so Wu Ming did not replenish them. And now it was the time to use them. Wu Ming's raised hand suddenly clenched into a fist. The originally sparse red marks on the back of his hand suddenly solidified, forming 3 scarlet command seals that resembled a bow and arrow, yet also resembled a pair of wings. Wu Ming replenished his magic power. After that, Wu Ming began to issue orders to Ishtar. By the command curse, O goddess of fertility and war, restore your magic power to full. By command spell mistress of heaven, restore your magic power. By the command of the curse, Ishtar, release your noble phantoms and break through the predicament. That's right, Wu Ming used all the command spells in one breath. Although there were 3 command spells, their function was only to replenish Ishtar's magic power. The first command was to replenish Ishtar's magic power. The second command was to make Ishtar's body overflow with magic power. The third command was to make Ishtar's magic power so much that it was completely out of control, to the extent that it would cause a big explosion if left alone. In this way, the effect of Ishtar's noble phantoms would be several times the original, or even more than 10 times. After all, this was not a game. Doubling was not just multiplying by 2, and multiplying by several times was not just multiplying by several. In this way, Wu Ming believed that Ishtar's noble phantoms would be able to affect the surrounding environment. With this, Wu Ming would be able to find them. Sure enough, a few seconds after Wu Ming gave the 3 orders, a light that resembled a falling star appeared in a certain direction. Then there was a big explosion. On Gadatsi's side, after the big explosion caused by Ishtar's noble phantoms, Matthew put away his noble phantoms, revealing a few pterosaurs and a few people on their backs. Just now, everyone was still thinking of a way to get out, but Ishtar suddenly panicked and shouted for Hyunryong. Then she released her noble phantoms that seemed to be many times stronger. After Ishtar's attack was released from Anna's horse, Matthew also activated his noble phantoms and successfully blocked in front of everyone, blocking the aftershock. TSK, TSK, TSK. Ishtar is indeed powerful. She can release such a powerful attack. Merlin sighed as he watched from the side. He did not care about what Ishtar, who was lying on Gadatsi's pterosaur, was thinking. Damn it. Hyunryong. Ishtar wanted to look ferocious, but she was too tired to do so. She even stuttered when she spoke. Ms. Ishtar, are you all right? Matthew looked at Ishtar with concern. However, Gadatsi interrupted. Matthew, you blocked the big explosion just now. Are you hurt? Matthew shook his head. I'm fine, senior. Ms. Ishtar's noble phantoms were launched far away. I only blocked the aftershock. But just the aftershock alone scared me. Quizzard was the one who spoke now. I didn't expect Ishtar to release such a powerful attack. If there were levels, Ishtar's attack could be categorized as EX. It's all virtuous. Dragon. That guy. Ugh. Ishtar tilted her head and stopped talking. She was so tired that she couldn't take it anymore. Ishtar's body almost exploded after 3 times of mana replenishment. If Ishtar did not release her noble phantoms quickly, Gadatsi and the rest would have been dead by now. Even after releasing her noble phantoms, Ishtar did not feel good. She was still weak. Therefore, it was not unreasonable for Ishtar to gnash his teeth at Wu Ming. Chapter 1024. His Excellency Hyunryong must be looking for us, Musasobo Benkei said. It could only be said that Wu Ming was worthy of the existence of the new army. Not only did Wu Ming understand, but Nyoruawan also understood Wu Ming's intention early on. His Excellency Hyunryong is right. If not, we wouldn't have found the exit. Following Nuwakamara's gaze, a gap appeared in front of them. Unlike the other places, light shone through the gap. They were indeed trapped, but Ishtar's noble phantasm forcefully blasted a hole in the black mud. Not only did Wu Ming get them out of danger, but he could also tell Wu Ming where they were. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Even Ishtar could only keep her dissatisfaction to herself. It was precisely because Wu Ming's action was correct that Ishtar, who did not have the moral high ground, could not find trouble with Wu Ming afterwards. Although she was the mistress of the sky, Ishtar, who had suffered a lot in the hands of Wu Ming, understood one thing. If she were to find trouble with Wu Ming, she could still save some face. However, if she were to find trouble with Wuming, she would definitely be tricked by Wuming, just like when she was in the underworld. Let's hurry up and leave, Godatsi suggested. If there were any accidents later, they would be in trouble. However, that was how trouble would come about. Suddenly, the entire space began to shake. Whether it was the sky, the sea, or even the walls that connected the sky and the sea, everything shook and a black substance began to fall. The sharp-eyed Quizzer was able to immediately tell that the black substance was black mud. Quizzard immediately ordered the pterosaurs. Quick! Pterosaurs, head there at full speed. A few pterosaurs flew in the direction of the gap. They were so fast that Godatsi had to hold on tightly to their backs. However, the black mud was falling faster and faster. Gradually, the entire space looked like it was raining black mud. The raindrops were the size of a fist. Fortunately, the gap between the raindrops was large and it was not a rainstorm yet. Therefore, they could continue to fly over on the pterosaurs. However, because the pterosaur was jumping up and down and swaying left and right to avoid the rain of black mud, Godatsi almost couldn't catch it. Fortunately, Mashu was there to help Godatsi. She didn't let Godatsi fall down, nor did she let Godatsi touch the black mud. However, everyone could see that the raindrops were getting bigger and denser. At this moment, the pterosaurs were still halfway to the exit. Although everyone knew that they could not touch the black mud, Quizzard could not help but say, "Everyone, don't get touched by the black mud." However, now that the volume and frequency of the raindrops had increased, it was too difficult to not get stained by the black mud. The first accident happened. Gah! The pterosaur that Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei were riding on was dripped by a drop of the black mud, and let out a scream. Then the entire pterosaur flew around uncontrollably, and even collided with several drops of rain. Lady Nuwakamaru. Don't worry about me, Michin. Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei's panicked voices came from the pterosaur. Lady Nuwakamaru. Mr. Michin. Matthew shouted nervously. Whoosh! Suddenly, countless petals flew to Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei's pterosaur. It was as if the pterosaur was frozen in place and became quiet. The rain that fell from the sky seemed to have encountered some resistance, and was blocked by the petals. In the next second, Merlin flew over on the pterosaur while Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru took the opportunity to jump onto Merlin's pterosaur. Piedra del Sol. The Quetzalcoatl god had released the real phantasm of the Piedra Almanac that was originally in the Temple of Eridu. Although Eric Metropolis was drowned by the sea of black mud, the Piedra god had summoned the Piedra Almanac to her side before Eric Metropolis was drowned. As for the size, it was Quizzard's phantasm, and could be changed at will. Flames and lava emerged from a fiery red stone in Quizzard's hand, and formed a semicircular protective shield. Quizzard raised it above her head. Everyone, come to my side. The protective shield of flames and lava blocked the rain above Quizzard's head, and was wide enough to protect the others. The pterosaur that Godatsi and the others were riding on immediately flew over. Everyone immediately flew toward the gap without stopping. After all, it was better to leave as soon as possible. The pterosaur that was stained by the rain fell into the darkness below as if it had died. After they were safe, Musasobo Benkei took the lead to ask about Nuwakamaru's safety. Lady Nuwakamaru, are you okay? Nuwakamaru half knelt on the pterosaur's back and shook his head to show that he was fine. Diqing, no, Ocean Lord, it's all thanks to you this time. Nuwakamaru knew that she was almost stained by the black mud. Although it was just a little bit of black mud, who knew how the black mud eroded? Was it instant assimilation? Or did it need time? No one knew, and no one would try. What are you talking about, Nuwakamaru? As long as you're okay. Musasobo Benkei, who was half kneeling on the pterosaur's back, lowered his head silently as if he was dead. This gave Nuwakamaru a shock. Similarly, Godatsi and Matthew, who were on the pterosaur's back, were also shocked. Mr. Diqing. Diqing. Quizzard, who was using her noble artifact, and Ishtar, who was exhausted, did not have time to care. However, Merlin, who was riding on the same pterosaur as Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru, seemed to have noticed something and squinted his eyes. However, Musasobo Benkei lowered his head and spoke. Lady Nawakamaru, I have something to ask of you. Hearing Musasobo Benkei's voice, Nawakamaru was relieved. What's the matter? As long as he was not dead, everything was fine. Can I ask you to die? After Musasobo Benkei finished speaking, he instantly got up and slashed at Nawakamaru with his Bisento. What? Godatsi and Matthew widened their eyes when they saw this scene. They could not react at all. Not only them, but even Nawakamaru could not react. After all, Nawakamaru did not expect Musasobo Benkei to assassinate him. This was not a dereliction of duty as a general on the battlefield. Instead, it was natural for him to lower his guard around someone close to him. However, the attack was still blocked. Clank. The holy sword that looked like an authentic item blocked the sharp-she blade, making a piercing sound. The one who blocked the attack was naturally Merlin, who was next to Nawakamaru. He had just noticed that something was wrong with Musasobo Benkei. Sure enough, you have been assimilated by the black mud. Chapter 1025. Following Merlin's words, everyone looked at Musasobo Benkei, who was holding his Bisento and preparing to slash. Musasobo Benkei's skin was originally the color of a dead person, and his thick eyelids were not something a normal person could have. But at this moment, Musasobo Benkei did not look like a normal person. Black lines could be vaguely seen on Musasobo Benkei's skin like tattoos, and a chaotic aura filled Musasobo Benkei's body. And at the back of Musasobo Benkei's neck, there was an obvious black mark. It was the mark of the black mud after it dried up. There was no doubt that he had been stained by the black mud when the pterosaur lost control. I didn't expect the black mud to be able to assimilate instantly. Merlin frowned, then used his sword to lift Musasobo Benkei's Bisento, then stabbed at Musasobo Benkei. However, Musasobo Benkei jumped off the pterosaur's back and stood on something black, bathing in the rain of black mud. It was a pterosaur, a black pterosaur. It was the pterosaur that had fallen below and was eroded by the black mud. This is really surprising. I didn't expect Sir Merlin's swordsmanship to be so outstanding. Merlin's move was not easy to block, so Musasobo Benkei chose to retreat. Senior, please be careful. Matthew, who reacted at this moment, immediately held his shield in front of Godatsi and Ishtar, and looked warily at Musasobo Benkei, who was standing on the black pterosaur. Quizzard knew what had happened, but she did not move and maintained her lava shield. However, the pterosaurs collectively sped up again. They had to leave the range of the rain of black mud first, or they would be in an extremely disadvantageous situation no matter what they did. Musasobo Benkei went from, the pterosaur lost control due to the black mud, to assassinating Nawakamaru, in less than 10 seconds. There was no doubt that he had been assimilated by the black mud, or Tiamat's authority, in these 10 seconds or even shorter. To be honest, this assimilation speed scared Quizzard. How could there be such an exaggerated ability in this world? Quizzard did not know that Tiamat's ability was most likely strengthened by the black mud, so she could only be amazed. He wasn't sure if the assimilation speed had anything to do with one's strength, but he was afraid that he would be done for once he was infected. Therefore, he had to leave the range of the rain of black mud. However, the black pterosaur, at the same speed, at the same time, the pterosaur was not far behind Nawakamaru's. At this moment, Nyoruowan spoke. When Nawakamaru's state of mind was unusually good. She did not break down because of Musasobo Benkei's assimilation. Instead, she talked to him very calmly. Merlin silently took a few steps back, leaving space for Musasobo Benkei and Nawakamaru to talk. The moment I asked you about your situation, I felt the existence of Mother. That is the supreme truth, the true Buddhist kingdom that saves all living beings from suffering. When he said this, Musasobo Benkei was clearly a little excited. No, it should be crazy. Lord Nawakamaru, I want you to return to Mother's embrace with them, and you should be in front of them. Unfortunately, you were stopped by Sir Merlin. As if he had really missed something important, Musasobo Benkei shook his head regretfully. Stay here and let this penniless monk send you to see Mother. With that, Musasobo Benkei raised his hand and grasped at the gap. Countless black mud filled the gap. The gap began to heal quickly. At this moment, Mizusobo Benkei could actually control the black mud. This gave everyone a fright. It was not easy to open a gap in this black mud space. Once it closed, who knew how to get out? It was hard to say whether Wuming could find them again. Everyone come to my side. Quizzer called out to the crowd. Merlin was the first to jump onto Quizzard's pterosaur. Then Nuwakamaru jumped onto Gadatsi, and came to Quizzard's side with Matthew, who was carrying Ishtar. Feathered serpent god pterosaur, full speed ahead. Quizzard's pterosaur that everyone was riding suddenly accelerated, and tried to speed out with the other pterosaurs that were following closely behind. However, Mizusobo Benkei smiled slightly. You can't get out. I'll wait for you here. Indeed, as Mizusobo Benkei said, when everyone was still a short distance away from the gap was almost closed. However, just when everyone was helpless, a black-purple ripple suddenly appeared in front of the pterosaurs that were flying at high speed. The pterosaurs, Gadatsi, and the others plunged into it, and the portal immediately closed. Seeing this scene, Mizusobo Benkei could not help but frown. His Excellency Hyunryong? At this point, the gap was completely closed without a single gap. A second ago, in the world outside the gap, Wuming floated in the air and opened the portal. In an instant, a few pterosaurs that were not small flew out. Then Wuming instantly closed the portal. I finally found you. Wuming looked at Gadatsi and the others who were on the pterosaur's back. Assassin, you're finally here. Gadatsi's face lit up with joy. I arrived just in time. If I was any later, I wouldn't have been able to save you. When Wuming arrived, he happened to see Gadatsi and the others flying toward him in the darkness. He saw that there was a gap that was rapidly closing, so Wuming directly opened a portal on the path that the pterosaurs had to pass through. That was how he managed to save Gadatsi and the others. I understand the situation now. You guys can return to Uruk first. Leave the rest to me. When Wuming saw Mizusobo Benkei standing on the back of a black pterosaur, he guessed that he was probably assimilated by the black mud. However, just when Gadatsi and Matthew wanted to say something, Merlin suddenly became serious. Are you ready? I'm ready. This was Wuming's answer, and he was quite certain. Then I'll leave it to you. In this regard, Wuming did not say anything and only nodded. Gadatsi and Matthew also shut their mouths and did not speak again. I won't leave. I want to stay. Nuwakamaru suddenly interrupted rather calmly. Without a doubt, she chose to stay because of Mizusobo Benkei. You might die. Wuming answered her simply. I'm sorry, Your Excellency Hyunryong. I've made up my mind. Wuming nodded. Since her attitude had already reached this point, he did not need to persuade her anymore. Ms. Nuwakamaru. Nyorua. Gadatsi and Matthew did not know what to say and looked worried. On the contrary, Nuwakamaru was quite optimistic. Your Excellency Fujimaru, Your Excellency Matthew, take care. The three of them looked at each other and nodded. After that, Quizzard spoke again. This is for you. She stretched out her hand, and there was a fiery red stone in her hand that seemed to be burning. This was the noble phantasm that Quizzard had just cast, the solar ephemeris, Piedra del Sol. This noble phantasm is activated by the solar ephemeris. It can be said that it's a one-time use noble phantasm. After it's activated, it won't be deactivated, so I want to give it to you to use up. I should have used this trick earlier. Then your subordinates wouldn't have been in trouble. Quizzard said as if she was blaming herself. In this regard, Nuwakamaru shook his head. It's not your fault, Your Excellency Quizzard. The rain of black mud was getting more and more difficult to dodge, so it was not an accident that it was hit. Moreover, this was a one-time use noble phantasm, so it must be kept for critical occasions. What's more, Quizzard immediately used this noble phantasm when there was an accident just now. It was obvious that she was not someone who did not know the severity of the situation. At this moment, Quizzard wanted to give this activated noble phantasm to Nuwakamaru, and let Nuwakamaru use it up. I'll take it. After that, Nuwakamaru's hand held the solar ephemeris. Chapter 1026. Wu-Ming opened the portal to Uruk and let Gadatsi and the others go back. Before they left, Ishtar, who had recovered a bit of strength, complained to Wu-Ming, as if Wu-Ming had done something to her. After closing the portal quickly, Wu-Ming looked at Nuwakamaru, who was not present. At this moment, Nuwakamaru's right hand was clenched into a fist, and smoke was coming out of it. That was the sign that the solar ephemeris was causing damage to Nuwakamaru's body, or rather, the spirit base. You really don't have to do this. Wu-Ming spoke again, although he knew it was useless. The Ocean Venerable followed me to the end this time, so I can't leave him behind. Then Nuwakamaru changed the topic. By the way, Sir Hyunryong, have you prepared your trump card? Wu-Ming nodded and looked in the direction he came from. Almost, but I still have something to do, and you're here. What Wu-Ming meant was that Nuwakamaru could help Wu-Ming complete this matter. Please tell me, sir. I will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire. At this moment, Nuwakamaru was like a loyal warrior, waiting for the king's order. Wu-Ming smiled at this. It's not that serious. I just need you to force Tiamat out. Force her out? Nuwakamaru was stunned. What should she do? And Wu-Ming looked at her hand, or rather, the solar ephemeris in her hand. I need you to burn the black mud. On the other side, on the sea of black mud, Wu-Ming sat cross-legged on the sea with his eyes closed, as if waiting for something. However, Wu-Ming's shaking fingers showed that Wu-Ming was not just waiting. He was constructing a tactic to summon his trump card. That trump card was not his noble phantasm. He needed the help of Kalis, who was in the route, to complete the summoning of this trump card. The reason why Kalis did not say much was that she was focusing on perfecting this trump card. The one who went to rescue Gadatsi and the others was Wu-Ming's doppelganger, which was transformed from a dependent. Except for the only weapon that could not be replicated, Wu-Ming's doppelganger had 100% of Wu-Ming's strength. Other than saving Gadatsi and the others, Wu-Ming's clone had another mission. Wu-Ming's trump card still needed a primer before it could be used. Only when Tiamat truly appeared would he be able to use it. Thus, luring out Tiamat was another mission of the doppelganger. Coincidentally, Quizzard had given the solar almanac to Nuwakamaru. So Wu-Ming's doppelganger did not need to do anything else other than use the solar almanac to burn the black mud. Although there was no way to completely burn the black mud, Wu-Ming speculated that as long as a part of it was burned, Tiamat would definitely appear. Wu-Ming guessed that this black mud was most likely something that belonged to Tiamat's body. Thus, as long as a part of it was burned, Tiamat would definitely appear. Wu-Ming, on the other hand, only needed to wait quietly and design a supportive tactic. Suddenly, the eastern side of the sky turned red, and the light of the fire soared. It was obvious that Nuwakamaru had begun to use the solar almanac to burn the sea of black mud. And it was also at this moment that the entire sea of black mud, as well as the space of black mud in the southeast where Gadatsi and the others had been trapped, began to produce powerful magical fluctuations. And along with this powerful magical fluctuation, Wu-Ming's trump card, which he had prepared long ago, also began to form a connection with this world. Is Tiamat about to come out? Wu-Ming opened his eyes and looked in the southwest direction, then looked at the sea of black mud beneath him and took a deep breath. The moment had finally arrived. Wu-Ming was about to activate this trump card that had been born out of a sudden whim. Let's begin, Kalis. Yes, master. After the conversation, Wu-Ming's body seemed to have given up all resistance and accepted the gravitational force, sinking directly into the sea of black mud. On the other side of Wu-Ming's clone, Nuwakamaru fell into the sea of black mud, and the solar almanac in her hand burned the black mud around her. The black mud dissipated at a speed visible to the naked eye, but this could be said to be harmless to the sea of black mud. However, calling out Tiamat only required a little stimulation. Whether or not the black mud could evaporate was not within Wu-Ming's consideration. It was just like how mosquitoes sucking blood would not cause much harm to humans, but humans would always react when they realized that their blood was being sucked. Feeling the increasingly turbulent magical power around him, Wu-Ming's clone nodded silently, then waved his hand and opened a teleportation portal beside Nuwakamaru. That's enough, Nuwakamaru. Return to Uruk. What's next is not something you can handle. Wu-Ming shouted at Nuwakamaru. Nuwakamaru's spiritual base was gradually collapsing as she released a relic that did not belong to her. If this were to continue, there was no doubt that she would leave. Wu-Ming did not want to kill Nuwakamaru. However, Nuwakamaru did not seem to hear what Wu-Ming said as she continued to release the flames and lava from the solar almanac. Nuwakamaru's face was a little twisted. It seemed like Nuwakamaru's mental state was not very good, and she was probably on the verge of turning evil. Wu-Ming controlled the teleportation portal to swallow Nuwakamaru, leaving the solar almanac alone. Wu-Ming's clone went to the solar almanac and held it with one hand, injecting a large amount of magical power into it. Since it was a one-time relic, Wu-Ming's clone decided to inject magical power into it before the relic lost its function completely until the solar almanac could no longer take it or dissipate it. The solar almanac was getting more and more ferocious as it received an endless supply of magical power. Countless flames and lava were surging as if they were going to destroy the world, constantly devouring the sea of black mud. This time it was no longer a mosquito bite but a venomous worm bite. Then, before the solar almanac could self-destruct, the entire sea of black mud went berserk. Like a deep-sea monster that appeared from the ocean, the sea of black mud soared into the sky like a dragon sucking in water. It was so fast and its range was so wide that it was shocking. Wu-Ming's clone, who was in the range, escaped through the teleportation portal at the last moment with the solar almanac, and arrived at where Wu-Ming was previously. The two places were quite far apart, and the sea there was only shaking. Wu-Ming's clone exclaimed as he watched the sky and water turn dark. It's a little sudden, but this proves that Tiamat is panicking. The solar almanac's movement earlier was considered to have hurt Tiamat. Otherwise, the sea of black mud would not have such a huge movement. After all, it was a one-time relic of the South American Master God. After receiving Wu-Ming's massive magical power, even Tiamat could not be unaffected. Wu-Ming raised his hand and looked at the solar almanac that was about to burn out. He made a decision. It's time for you to fulfill your final mission. Wu-Ming weighed it, and then threw it to the place where the sky and water were so dark that he could not see the situation clearly. In the next second, the solar almanac was like the sun that shone on everything, releasing its last ray of light in the sky. A gigantic dragon beast that was many times bigger than the 11 demonic beasts earlier was standing there with its eyes closed. That was Tiamat. Chapter 1027. Tiamat's body was covered with black mud. At a glance, it was pitch black without any extra color. Her four limbs were on the ground in the posture of a beast, and only her mouth was faintly visible, with an exaggerated degree of crack. This oppressive feeling, as expected of the goddess of creation. Wu-Ming's doppelganger's tone was full of emotion. It couldn't be helped. Anyone who saw this scene would feel the same way, such as Godatsi and the others who were far away in Uruk. Because of Wu-Ming's vigilance, the 5 magical beasts trapped in Ereshkigal's underworld didn't do anything. After Mayu brought the letter to Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh allowed Mayu to take part of the combat power to the underworld to investigate. After that, Mayu took Enkidu, Fanbaba, and Zhuge Kongming, who rarely came out, to the underworld. According to Zhuge Kongming's idea, he restudied the seal of divine right Dinger, and wanted to find a magical beast to test it out. The 5 magical beasts were indeed as Wu-Ming said. The underworld didn't restrict them. Ereshkigal almost failed. Fortunately, Mayu arrived with reinforcements, and Zhuge Kongming's new seal of divine right Dinger was also verified. The price was that the 5 magical beasts died. After that, Ereshkigal didn't continue to stay in the underworld, and Zhuge Kongming also didn't stay in the house. At this moment, everyone, including Ereshkigal and Zhuge Kongming, and those who returned to Uruk, gathered on the southwest city wall, looking at Tiamat's figure in the distance, which was illuminated by the solar calendar stone. Although a large sea of black mud formed Tiamat's body, there was still a large sea of black mud spreading on the ground, and it didn't seem to decrease at all. That's Tiamat. Godatsi's throat moved. Obviously, she was surprised and afraid of Tiamat. Even Quizzard, Ishtar, Ereshkigal, and other goddesses felt a trace of fear. It was enough to show how powerful Tiamat's deterrence was. Tiamat appeared in the depths of the Persian Gulf, which was the Indian Ocean region. It was thousands of miles away from Uruk city. However, even so, because of Tiamat's huge body, Gadotsi and the others could see Tiamat from Uruk. Before this, everyone in Uruk was ordered by Gilgamesh to stay in their homes or temporary residences to pray. They were not allowed to go out and ignore anything that happened outside. Therefore, Tiamat's appearance didn't cause any panic among the humans in Uruk. That's right. That huge dragon beast is the creation mother of Mesopotamia, Tiamat. Merlin walked to the front as a commentator. Tiamat's body was used to create the world, which means that her body must be huge. However, this size is beyond my imagination. Roman's sarcastic voice came from Gadotsi's bracelet. However, now wasn't the time to talk about this, right? How were they going to fight such a huge Tiamat god? Doctor, can you still track Assassin's location? Before thinking about how to fight Tiamat, Gadotsi was first worried about Wuming. No. It's too far away. Plus, the black mud has a disruptive effect. There's no way to detect Hyunryong's location. However, at this moment, a young voice came into everyone's ears. Brother Wuming is fine. Mayu looked into the distance with eyes full of trust. Although everyone was baffled by the fact that she was Wuming's sister, Mayu's aura was indeed Wuming's. It couldn't be faked. Brother Wuming saved my world and Ilya's world. At the same time, he also saved me, Ilya, and Blackie. Brother Wuming saved everyone. This time, I believe that Brother Wuming will also save everyone. That was the trust between Mayu and Wuming. As soon as those words came out, everyone was no longer worried about Wuming. Even their fear of Tiamat was reduced a lot. Following this atmosphere, Merlin, who acted as a commentator, spoke again. The beast of original sin has appeared. The human's evil will lead to the appearance of the crown servant. In addition, the appearance of one evil will lead to the birth of another evil. The crown servant has already appeared. The next thing to be born is a new human's evil. Thus, to fight against the beast of original sin, Merlin's words were ethereal and deeply rooted in people's hearts. The entire Uruk seemed to have heard it, including Gadotsi and the others beside Merlin. In the next second, reflecting Merlin's words, the crown servant has already appeared. A bell sounded out of thin air. Dang dang dang. Gadotsi and Matthew couldn't help but shiver. In the next second, an old man wearing a tattered linen and a hood stood in the middle of the crowd. Huh. Gadotsi and Matthew were shocked. Although the others were shocked by the old man's infiltration method, they didn't show anything because they were used to not showing their emotions. Obeying the will of heaven, the crown assassin, Hassan Sabah, gives the opportunity to live from death. The old man's words were old but full of confidence. Gadotsi, Matthew, and Roman and Leonardo da Vinci in Chaldea were all surprised. This old man was the first Hassan that Gadotsi and the others had asked to see at the Azrael temple. Come on, the evil that represents the opposite of the crown, the existence that has inherited the name of the beast, the apex of evil in the human fire worship sect, the three-headed demonic dragon, appear here. The entire sea of black mud was turbulent, and the source of the turbulence was near the coastline of the former Persian Gulf. In the next second, the turbulence increased, and Uruk city was affected as if there was an earthquake. Then, a huge pure white figure leaped out of the sea of black mud, hovered in the sky a few times, and dispelled part of the black clouds before landing on the sea of black mud. It was a behemoth that was not inferior to Tiamat, but its color was completely opposite to the dark Tiamat. This behemoth was pure white. Like Tiamat, it was like a beast with 4 limbs on the ground, and a pair of folded gray wings on its back. In addition, this pure white behemoth had 3 heads, with a pair of dragon horns on the middle head, a crown on the left head, and nothing on the right head. It seemed lifeless as its head drooped. In addition, the pure white behemoth was holding 2 demonic beasts that were larger than humans in size. They were Musu Maf and Kururu, who had escaped. The black beast and the pure white beast stood opposite each other with their eyes closed as if waiting for an opportunity. That is. In response to Gadotsi's question, Merlin, as the commentator, continued to speak. One of the evil points in the Persian fire worship sect's mythology The three-headed demonic dragon that once destroyed half of the world, Dahaka, has now appeared as another human evil beast? Gudatsi and Matthew were shocked. However, Ishtar, who had almost recovered, noticed a clue. She realized that she had seen the three-headed demonic dragon's middle head before. Wait, is this three-headed demonic dragon transformed by Hyenryong? Hey, Gudatsi and Matthew looked at Ishtar in disbelief. Look, the three-headed demonic dragon's middle head is basically the same as the head of Hyenryong's dragon body, isn't it? Everyone looked at the place where Ishtar pointed. Gudatsi, Matthew, Quizzard, Leopard Man, and Anna had never seen Wuming's dragon body, so they were not sure. However, Gilgamesh and Nuwakamara definitely knew. When Wuming transformed into his dragon body and fought with Gorgon, although they were still far away, Nuwakamaru, as a servant, must have some impression of it. However, the only ones who knew the most were Merlin, the cheater, and Enkidu and Funbaba, who had always been by Wuming's side. Immediately, Enkidu spoke. That's right, that human evil is indeed Hyenryong, Sama's transformation. It was summoned by Crown Assassin, and another human evil. Human evils were attracted to each other. When a human evil appeared, other human evils would appear in turn. This was destined. And Crown Servant, as the suppression mechanism of human evils, would naturally appear together with human evils. In other words, where human evils appeared, there must be Crown Servant, and where Crown Servant appeared, there must be human evils. However, this became a contradiction. In the end, did the Crown Servant appear first, or did the beast appear first? Wuming relied on Crown Assassin and the double primer to successfully appear as a Crown Servant. And as the carrier, naturally, was the three-headed demonic dragon Dakaha's body that Wuming obtained from the box world. Chapter 1028. Back then, when Wuming inherited Dakaha's human final trial identity in the box and returned to the root, Wuming suddenly had the idea of transferring the human final trial identity to Dakaha's body. It was not to revive Dakaha, but to reconstruct a new body based on Dakaha's body to act as the human final trial's absolute evil. When Wuming entered the Mesopotamia singularity, his spiritual base was forged from Dakaha's body. Kalas continued to perfect and refine the concept of the human final trial in the root, adding the concept of the human final trial identity to Wuming's spiritual base, created by Dakaha. However, later on, after realizing that the enemy was the human evil, Wuming had a new idea: to use the human evil's identity to appear. Merlin also said that the human evil and the Crown Servant were attracted to each other. If one existed, the other would exist. Likewise, the human evil and the human evil would also attract each other. If one existed, the other would also appear. This was an unbreakable rule. The human final trial identity was similar to the human evil identity itself. Furthermore, Dakaha belonged to Persian mythology, and Persia was a part of Mesopotamia. Therefore, with the Crown Servant Assassin and the other human evil as the primer, and with the suppression force behind Wuming giving him some face, the new human evil, Beast 7 Dakaha, was naturally born. The human evil seventh beast is Lord Hyenryong's trump card. Because this human evil was controlled by Wuming, although it was harmful to humans, Wuming would not actively harm humans. He would leave the Type Moon world after eliminating the other human evil, Tiamat, so he would not harm humans. It was even possible that after he left, the human evil would automatically leave him and return to the real Beast 7. That's right, the human evil was transformed from the love of the 7 humans. Wuming was only temporarily using a series of methods to appear as the 7th beast, but he did not truly become the human evil. However, if the human evil that inherited the 7th beast remained in the Type Moon world, it would be qualified to become the new beast and replace the original 7th beast. After all, the scene that Dakaha, who inherited the final trial's absolute evil, most wanted to see was the human hero standing on its corpse and advancing towards a better future. In a sense, this was also considered love. After all, the human final trial's absolute evil in the Type Moon world was an evil that humans had to overcome. It was fully qualified to do so. The human evil against the human evil. This is Hyenryong's trump card. Merlin said the final words. Now the battle of the beasts that only exists in fantasy is about to begin. Following Merlin's words, Enkidu, who was originally carrying Finbaba, put down Finbaba and flew into the sky. It turned into a dazzling silver chain, and flew towards the pure white three-headed demonic dragon, wrapping around its drooping head. In the next second, the three-headed demonic dragon's 3 heads opened their eyes at the same time. Red pupils, and blue pupils appeared in the eyes of the 3 heads respectively. Trinity, huh? Gilgamesh saw the 3-headed demonic dragon's current state. The 3 heads were occupied by 3 different spiritual bases. One of them was Wuming's, another was Enkidu's, and the last one seemed to be Wuming's magic attire. It's rare to see a magic attire with a spiritual base alone, Zhuge Kongming commented. Then, as the 3-headed demonic dragon opened its eyes, Tiamat on the opposite side also opened her eyes, revealing a pair of shining starry eyes. Roar! The 3-headed demonic dragon roared like an ordinary beast. Eh! Tiamat let out a mournful cry that sounded like a song. The 2 giant beasts let out their own roars, and then the battle began. After the roar ended, the pure white giant beast casually swallowed Musu Mafu and Kururu as if it was demonstrating its power. Eh! The pitch-black giant beast expressed its anger. Its roar contained a powerful magical power, and the sea of black mud was forcefully split apart by this magical power. However, the pure white giant beast wasn't affected by this roar at all. It spread the curled shadow wings on its back. The shadow wings covered the sky and were so huge that they were bigger than the pure white giant beast's body. With the help of the shadow wings, the pure white giant beast flew into the sky. Its mouth contained a white light that could destroy the world, and it suddenly shot it toward the pitch-black giant beast. Dong! The tyrant's halo hit Tiamat, and the white light covered everything in the surroundings. It even covered the solar almanac that had long disappeared, and it lit up the sky and the earth. In an instant it was as bright as day. The Uruk city was very far away from the place where the 2 giant beasts were fighting. Moreover, the Uruk was protected by Wuming's relic, so the battle between the 2 giant beasts wouldn't affect the Uruk at all. Although they didn't know what was going on outside, they still followed Gilgamesh's orders. The humans were still praying in their homes, and they didn't care about what was going on outside. They just prayed that the end of the world would be over as soon as possible. On the city wall in the southwest of Uruk, everyone covered their eyes. There was no other reason as the light was too glaring, and they couldn't see what was going on clearly. However, in the end everyone walked down the city wall. After all, they couldn't just close their eyes and stare blankly. However, at that moment, everyone understood that the battle between the 2 giant beasts was not something that they could intervene in. If Quizzard wasn't a servant but a god, she could still intervene. However, no matter if it was a servant or a body, they couldn't intervene, including Ishtar. Damn it! Hyenryong, if you lose, I won't forgive you. Ishtar muttered because she couldn't do anything. God bless, Master Hyenryong, you must win. Ishtar glanced at it, and it turned out that her demigod, Ereshkigal, was praying to the god. Hey, are you a god yourself? Ishtar couldn't help but complain. I'm willing, can't I? Ereshkigal blushed and stared back at Ishtar. Although the 2 were half-sisters, they didn't get along well. However, to Ereshkigal's surprise, Ishtar didn't refute Ereshkigal. Instead, she comforted her. Don't worry, Hyenryong won't lose. He saved the Uruk. We just need to believe and wait. Although Ishtar's gentleness was somewhat uncomfortable, Ereshkigal felt good. She remembered what Wuming said at the beginning. It seemed that Wuming didn't lie. Ishtar was actually a good goddess. While Ereshkigal was stunned, Gilgamesh suddenly spoke. Finbaba, with your strength, you should be able to help. Gilgamesh stood in front of Finbaba, who was rubbing her eyes, and said so. Master told me to stay here. Finbaba said in a childish voice. Gilgamesh raised his eyebrows, but then Gilgamesh realized why Wuming asked Finbaba to stay here. So that's how it is, you are also a crown. Gudatsi and Matthew were surprised. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci of Chaldea were also surprised. Why does it seem like a crown is cheap? 2 human evils naturally need 2 crown servants. Yang just let Fimbaba temporarily accept the identity of the Crown Rider to maintain the situation of two human evils. Once Fimbaba uses her power, the power of the Crown Rider will be lost. In short, he used the contradiction between crown servants and human evils. The first thing to know was that there was no rule that the number of human evils needed to be the same number of crown servants. Originally, the Crown Assassin appeared because of Beast 2, but the Crown Assassin was used by Wuming to pair with his own Beast 7. As a result, the second beast lost its corresponding crown servant. As a result, there must be another crown servant to maintain the balance. Wuming must maintain this state, so that the contradiction will not be broken and he can continue to exist. At this moment, Wuming was not the real Beast 7. He could only use this method to make himself appear. Hearing Merlin's clear and logical analysis, everyone was enlightened. However, there was something that Merlin didn't understand. Merlin could understand why the first Hassan cooperated with Wuming's action. After all, the two had met before. But what about Fimbaba? She was neither a servant nor a human. How could she take on the title of rider? The reason was that the suppression force was Wuming's backer. He temporarily put the title of rider on Fimbaba without the slightest pressure. Wuming paid the price anyway. During the acceptance of the title, Fimbaba couldn't use her power. However, Merlin would never know the answer. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.